Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. They called it the Hollow Road case, but no one who lived in Hollow Creek liked to use that name. Saying it out loud felt like summoning something. The memory, the smell, the silence that crept in after each discovery. 4 people vanished in 1 year. One by one, always without warning, always without blood. The town wasn't large. It wasn't the kind of place where you could go missing without someone noticing. And yet they did. They disappeared like ghosts swallowed by the dense pine, choked woods that bordered the crooked stretch of asphalt everyone just called the Hollow. It wasn't just the vanishings. It was what came after. The letters, the tape recordings, the drawings carved into the bark of trees. It was the way their eyes were cut out, always missing, never found. It was the voice on the tape's monotone, trembling, rehearsed, as if someone was trying to sound human and failing. But what gripped people most wasn't the horror, it was the puzzle. Who was doing this, and why? Not just any why, but that kind of why, the kind you whisper late at night, when you think about the kid from high school who never spoke but stared too long. When you remember the neighbor who always smelled like bleach and kept his blinds shut even in July. The kind of why that lingers. That haunts, that infects. No one in Hollow Creek knew the truth, not yet. But by the end, everyone would be forced to confront the thing they didn't want to believe. The monster didn't come from outside. It had always been here, breathing their air, shopping at their stores, smiling their smiles, watching, waiting. The first to disappear was Carrie Mathers, March 2nd, 2021. She was 17, a senior at Hollow Creek High. Blonde hair, braces, always wore a cherry red hoodie. She vanished on her way home from band practice. The security camera at the school caught her leaving the building at 6:38 p.m. Then, nothing, no trail. No phone pings, no dropped backpack. She simply stopped existing. People said she must have run away. That was always the first guess. The world had taught them to believe that teenage girls vanish because they want to. It was easier to think that than face the alternative. That something had taken her. Something that left no trace. Exactly 3 days later, her parents received a manila envelope. No return address. Inside a single photograph. Carrie, sitting in a wooden chair in what looked like a basement, her mouth duct-taped, her arms wrapped tight with electrical cord, her hoodie stained dark at the collar, no blood. But the eyes were missing. Black sockets where blue should have been. Pinned to her shirt with a safety pin was a note. Sloppy handwriting, all caps, like someone trying too hard. EOSRUTH. IONTOCE. Detective Lina Harmon had worked in Hollow Creek for 11 years. She wasn't new to strange cases. This town had its share of meth busts, abusive uncles, and seasonal suicides. But this was something else. The envelope had been left on the Mathers' doorstep sometime in the early hours of the morning. No prints. No tire marks. No security footage. It was as if someone had walked through the woods, barefoot, and simply delivered it. The photo was real. FBI confirmed it, but the background was a mystery. Concrete walls, rust-streaked pipes, a single 40-watt bulb dangling from the ceiling. No clues. Nothing to tie it to a real place. Carrie's eyes had been removed with surgical precision. No signs of swelling. No bruising. Post-mortem. Maybe not. The parents collapsed. The town held a vigil. The principal gave a speech. And then, as always, the world moved on. Until it happened again. April 17th. A boy this time, Milo Jenkins. 23, college dropout, worked at the hardware store. Introvert. Lived with his grandmother. Last seen locking up the shop at 8:02 p.m. By 8:07, he was gone. The security footage showed him walking to his truck. He opened the door, leaned in, then froze. He didn't move for 27 seconds. Just stood there, staring into the cab. Then he turned around and walked into the darkness. No hesitation. No struggle. like he was following something. 3 days later, another envelope. This time, it arrived at the police station. Same handwriting. Shi bihimaya. Inside was a new photo. Milo seated in the same chair. This time no duct tape, just eyes missing. A wet streak of blood running down his cheek like a crimson tear. But there was more. A cassette tape. No label. Lena had to dig out a dusty old player from the evidence room just to hear it. She sat alone in the station's basement, heart thudding like a war drum. She pressed play. A voice, male, maybe flat, mechanical. Every word sounded learned, like a child trying to mimic emotions without understanding them. You lie when you speak. You lie with your mouth and your face, but not your eyes. They scream the truth. I wanted to listen, but eyes don't talk. So I cut them. I looked. I didn't see. Why don't they show me? Click. End of tape. By the time the third victim vanished, the FBI had moved in. June 5th. Mallory Ray, 31. Single mother. She disappeared on her way home from her night shift at the diner. Security footage caught her entering her car at 1:12 a.m. But when police found the car, it was parked neatly on the side of a dirt road 5 miles away. Engine off. Keys still in the ignition. Driver's seat empty. No struggle. No damage. Envelope arrived as expected, this time with a DVD. The footage was rough. Handheld. Shaky, it opened with Mallory sitting in the chair, crying. Muffled sobs. Duct tape on her mouth again. Then the camera panned, shakily, to the wall. A scrawl of words written in what looked like red paint or blood. THUIVRTAGHT Mo2 Lok THERIGHT Moi. The camera turned back to Mallory. Closer now. Closer. Until the frame was just her face, her wide, panic-drenched eyes. And then the camera jolted forward. Everything went black. Then one final frame, just her face again. Hollowed out. The last words of the video. A whisper. Barely audible. Now I see. That's when things turned. That's when the town realized this wasn't random. This wasn't a drifter or a psycho passing through. This was personal. Someone wanted them to see something. Someone who knew Hollow Creek. Someone who had lived here. Who maybe still did. They started whispering about Jimmy Wade. He was always off. Quiet. Tall. Never made eye contact. Diagnosed with schizophrenia when he was 15. Autism spectrum too. Said he heard things. Voices, whispers, thoughts that weren't his. But he'd been institutionalized years ago, after a breakdown. Or so they thought. Lena pulled his file. She didn't like what she found. He'd been released in 2019. Stable, they said. No history of violence. But the details were muddy. The records from the facility were sparse. One therapist's note stood out. He seems detached from reality but focused. Fixated on eyes. Keeps repeating the same phrase. If I see enough, I'll finally understand. Lena visited his last known address. An old trailer off Route 9. The inside was a museum of madness. Walls covered in Polaroids. All eyes. Cut out from magazines, printouts, books, pinned to corkboards, taped to mirrors. Stuck under layers of plastic wrap. And in the center of the room, a chair. Not just any chair. The chair. But there was no Jimmy Wade. The trail had gone cold. Or so they thought. July 9th, fourth victim. Not someone from the town this time. A state trooper, Michael Danvers, was found dead in his car off Hollow Road. No eyes, no tongue. In his hand, a note too loud. Couldn't see. The killings had changed. They were growing, adapting. Now it wasn't just about eyes. It was about sight, perception, control. A need to understand something beyond what any sane person could grasp. And there was another letter. This one wasn't sent to the police. It was found on the windshield of Lena Harmon's cruiser. Handwritten. No envelope. Detective, you look too much. Maybe that's why you can't see. It was personal now. And it was far from over. The killer was out there. Watching. Waiting. And he was just getting started. They found the dog first. A beagle. Torn open. Guts strewn like wet rope across the frostbitten leaves behind the chapel on Chapel Hill Road. It wasn't just the violence of it. It was intentional. Laid out, displayed, almost anatomical. A slice here, a clean line there. The animal's eyes were gone, of course, but the body wasn't dumped. It was staged. Lying on its side as if in sleep, paws folded neatly. Above it, scratched into the tree bark, Naut Enogiach. The town priest, Father Mark, made the discovery during his morning prayer walk. He hadn't spoken much to anyone since. He just kept saying the same thing, "It's not over. It's not over. It's not over." And he was right, because that very night, another envelope arrived. Not to a home, not to the station, but to the Hollow Creek Elementary School, addressed to Ms. Eliza Monroe's 4th grade class. Inside, a photograph of the dog. Next to it, a drawing, crude, childlike. A person with black circles where the eyes should be, standing next to what looked like a window. From the other side, more eyes stared in. Countless, endless. Scribbled in red crayon below, "I see EOSEEME. Principal Reeves nearly had a heart attack." The school was closed for 2 days. Lena Harmon stood outside the taped-off door, watching the sun crawl over the treetops, her jaw tight. There was no blood on the envelope. No prints. Again, but the smell, something chemical, clung to it. Formaldehyde maybe, or something close. There was a feeling now, one the town hadn't named yet. Not just fear, but dread. Fear passes. Dread grows. It worms in through your ears, your eyes, and coils around your spine. It convinces you that you're not just in danger. You've always been in danger. That the past, the missing kids, the strange boy from down the road, none of that was a warning. It was a beginning. Lena started digging harder. She pulled old files. Every psychiatric patient from the Hollow Creek region for the last 20 years. She looked at missing persons, stray deaths, accidents that no one ever questioned, and that's when she found the name again. Not Jimmy Wade. Peter Willoughby. The name wasn't listed in his main file, but as an alias, one Jimmy had used during his time at the Haverhill Institute. Not for any legal reason. Just something he made up during therapy sessions. Peter sees what Jimmy can't, he'd written in a journal, found after one of his more violent outbursts. Peter listens. He teaches me what to do with the eyes. Schizophrenia. Paranoid subtype. PTSD from childhood abuse. Developmental disorder flagged in early education records. Lena stared at the words, numb. This wasn't a clear profile. This was a maelstrom. A storm of conflicting thoughts, buried trauma, and obsessive compulsion. A person created through cruelty, sharpened by neglect, polished into something terrifying by years alone with his own mind. But how had he stayed invisible for so long? An anonymous tip cracked it. A call came into the Hollow Creek PD at 3:42 a.m. The voice sounded warped, like a tape being played underwater. No name given. Just 3 words before the line cut off, "Check the well." The property was 30 miles out. Abandoned farmhouse. Belonged to a man named Carl Hauser, dead since 1996. It was one of those forgotten places, left to rot, the roof eaten away by weather and time. The well sat behind the house, camouflaged by weeds, its cover rusted in place. Lena and a small team from the FBI came out with dogs and drones. When they opened the well, the stench hit them like a hammer, death, and not fresh. They lowered a camera. 37 feet down, the footage caught something that made Lena's stomach twist, a tangle of clothing, rope, flesh, multiple bodies, decomposed beyond recognition. But even in the grainy, pixelated video, one thing was unmistakable. Every skull was missing its eyes. Forensics later confirmed it. 5 bodies. 3 women, 2 men. One was Carrie Mathers. They'd been kept there, rotting in a pool of collected groundwater, beneath a house no one visited, under a name no one remembered. But there were other things found too. Tiny drawings etched into the wall of the well itself, scratched with fingernails or rocks. Always the same theme, a central figure, standing in darkness, surrounded by eyes. But the figure had no eyes of its own, just a hollow face, a mouth stitched shut, a kind of living void. Lena knew it then. Jimmy Wade was never looking for just sight. He wasn't mutilating for shock. He wasn't even trying to kill. He was trying to understand. Each victim was an attempt to answer some question that had haunted him for years. Why couldn't he see what others saw? And the scariest part, he still hadn't found his answer. July 14th, they received the first audio letter. Not a tape. Not a DVD. An SD card mailed in a clear bag. No return address. The audio began with silence, then footsteps, then a dragging noise. Wet, slow, then breathing. Not panicked, not angry, just breathing. Calm, controlled. Then the voice, clearer this time, no distortion. I met a girl who smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. I took them. But they lied too. Maybe the mouth tells the truth. I'll try that next. Then laughter. The kind that doesn't rise. That sinks. That curls in your gut and makes your teeth ache. And then a date. August 5th. Lena played the message over and over. August 5th. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A threat? An anniversary? No. It was today's date. And that meant he was going to kill again. It was a race now. The entire town locked down. FBI swept every known property cabin, storage unit within a 50-mile radius. But they were chasing a ghost. Someone who understood how they worked, who planned 10 steps ahead, who had nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. The attack came at 8:11 p.m. An Uber driver, Rachel Klein, had just picked up a fare outside the local shopping center. Man in a baseball cap, sunglasses, hoodie. She didn't think twice. She was halfway through a podcast when he leaned forward from the back seat and whispered, "I think you see me now." Then everything went black. They found her car 3 hours later. It was parked outside the Hollow Creek Library. Neatly, like always. Her purse on the passenger seat. Engine still warm, but she was gone. Another envelope waited inside. Photo. Rachel in the chair. Same setup. But this time a change. Her eyes weren't missing. Her mouth was gone. Sewn shut. Skin folded and stitched like a nightmare medical experiment. The message read, "Hey Arias Sinalutio Amuchiard Side Tioli Tle." The pattern had changed. The killer wasn't just experimenting now. He was escalating, moving past the eyes, learning, testing, adapting, and Lena knew something no one else dared say aloud. This wasn't a killer looking to be stopped. This was a killer trying to finish something, and he was far from done. There was no sleep in Hollow Creek that night. Not for Lena Harmon. Not for the exhausted FBI team parked in the makeshift operations tent outside the police station. Not for the parents who kept their children close, watching the front door like it might open on its own. Because somewhere out there, on a back road, in an abandoned house, in the thick black of the woods, Rachel Klein was either already dead or living through something worse. And everyone knew it. The video came at dawn. A USB drive slipped under the door of the Hollow Creek Gazette. The editor, June Teller, found it when she arrived at 6:17 a.m. She didn't call the police right away. She watched it first. Alone. She vomited in the sink halfway through. When she finally called Lena, she didn't even say hello. She just whispered, "It's her." He did something to her face. The video wasn't long, just under 3 minutes. It opened on Rachel in the chair, but there was no tape this time. She sat completely still, like she wasn't even breathing. Her mouth had been sewn shut crudely with thick black string. Her hands were bound, but her eyes were wide open, alive, alert. The frame zoomed in so close you could see the whites trembling around her pupils. Then, from behind the camera, a voice calm, slow, like a man narrating a bedtime story. She lied with her smile, but the eyes said more. I tried to listen to both. I tried so hard, but it's never the same. The skin moves, the eyes scream, the mouth smiles. They all lie in different ways. He paused. I think I was born wrong. Then the camera jerked sideways, revealing a wall covered in faces, not photographs, drawings, hundreds of them. All the same faces with eyes, but no mouths. Faces with mouths, but no eyes, no two the same, each one labeled with a name. Some names Lena recognized, Carrie, Milo, Mallory, even Officer Danvers. And now Rachel, Below her name, scrawled in shaky, frantic letters, she say du BTC Coldientel. By the time the video made it to Quantico, the behavioral analysis unit had a profile forming. They were working backward now, tracking every strange detail that had felt random, but wasn't. The chemical smell on the envelopes. Formalin. Used in embalming animal dissection and preservation. The bindings. Electrical cord, the kind used in older psychiatric hospitals. The stitching. Veterinary grade suture thread. Not perfect, but familiar enough to someone who'd handled it before. Someone like Jimmy Wade, or as he now seemed to call himself, Peter. The theory was simple: Jimmy had fractured at some point, maybe years ago, maybe as a child, maybe in that institution. Peter was the part of him that survived the worst of it, the part that learned how to stay hidden, how to appear normal, how to smile when no one was looking at his eyes. But theories weren't going to save Rachel Klein. They followed the thread, literally. A fragment of the suture thread used in Rachel's mouth had an unusual marker, tiny red flecks baked into the coating. Manufacturing defect, one that had led to a recall in 2018. Only a few boxes ever made it into circulation. One had been sent to a veterinary clinic 45 miles from Hollow Creek, long since shut down. Lena and Agent Walker drove out there at midnight, headlights slicing through fog. What they found was nothing. The building was gutted, walls ripped out, graffiti, mold, bird droppings, no power, no furniture. But there was something else. A smell, that same chemical undertone. Beneath the collapsed floorboards in one of the exam rooms, they found a trapdoor, locked from the inside. They forced it open. A crawl space, 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, barely tall enough to crouch. Inside the chair, the same one. Stained now, the wood warped from damp. And a box, metal, locked. They didn't wait for a warrant. Inside the box, eyes, dozens of them, preserved in formalin, floating in silence. Labeled by name and date, Carrie, Milo, Mallory. Even duplicates, multiple eyes with the same name. As if he'd been collecting replacements, searching for the right ones. But Rachel's name wasn't there. The break came from the old woman. Her name was Nadine Conroy. Lived alone in a trailer on the edge of Black Hollow Woods. Claimed she saw a man dragging something through the trees the night Rachel vanished. She didn't call earlier because, in her words, I didn't want to get involved with ghosts. Lena and the search team combed the area. 2 hours in, a dog barked at a pile of leaves that didn't belong. Beneath it, a hatch, reinforced. Heavy, it took bolt cutters to get it open. Inside, there was light. A generator hummed somewhere below. The air was cold, recycled, clean, almost sterile. The room wasn't big, maybe the size of a shipping container, but it was functional. Sterile table, metal chair, lights rigged to the ceiling, and Rachel, unconscious, strapped to the floor. She was alive. Barely. Her mouth had been restitched. The crude black thread replaced with surgical suture. Her wrists were raw. She hadn't eaten in days. She came to while they carried her out, her eyes rolling in her head, her throat working like she wanted to scream but couldn't. Not because she was gagged, because she'd forgotten how. At the hospital, she finally wrote something. Took her nearly an hour to steady her hand. She didn't ask for food, or her family. She just wanted a pen and paper. When she handed it to Lena, her fingers trembled. 5 words. He was watching the mirror. Lena didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying Rachel's words in her head. He was watching the mirror. Not her. Not the camera. Not the walls. The mirror. But there had been no mirrors in that room. So what had she seen? The answer came unexpectedly. A retired janitor from the Haverhill Institute came forward. His name was Elliot Bloom. He'd worked at the facility during the early 2000s, back when Jimmy Wade was first committed. He remembered the boy, tall, silent, always watching. He also remembered something else, something they were told never to write in the official reports. Jimmy wouldn't look people in the eye, wouldn't talk, wouldn't respond to his name. but he'd stare at his own reflection for hours. Not grooming, not out of vanity, just watching, studying, as if he were waiting for the mirror to do something. One time, Elliot caught him whispering to the glass. He said the eyes on the other side understood him. Elliot told Lena. Said the real ones never did. It clicked. All of it, the eyes. The mutilation. The staging. Jimmy wasn't just trying to see truth in others. He was trying to build a face that finally matched what he saw in the mirror. The chair. The recordings. The silence. They weren't trophies. They were auditions. But Peter, Jimmy, whatever was left of him, was still out there. He'd left Rachel alive for a reason. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe it was failure. Or maybe it was escalation. A change in method. A test. And Lena knew what was coming next. He wasn't going to take people one by one anymore. He was going to put on a show. And all of Hollow Creek was about to become his audience. 3 days. That's all the town had. 3 days of silence after Rachel Klein was found before the next storm hit. It didn't come with screams or blood or a missing person. It came with music. On the fourth night, just past 11 p.m., the speakers around Hollow Creek's old public park, long since disused, rusty from decades of neglect, crackled to life. No one even knew they still worked, but they did. And what they played wasn't a song. It was a nursery rhyme, slow, off-key, warped as if dragged through sludge before reaching the speakers. See no evil, hear no sound. Cut the face and stitch it down. Take the truth and wear it proud. Now the silence screams out loud. The voice was unmistakable, that same cold, crawling tone. Not a whisper, not a shout. Just flat, like someone who had practiced every syllable with the precision of a surgeon. The park was empty. It always was after dark. But that night, 3 different homes that bordered it reported lights flickering, briefly. And the same thing written across their windows in black marker. Diras Rashiar Sale Compi. Lena Harmon read the phrase again and again from her desk at the station. Her hands were stained with printer ink. Half a dozen photographs of the graffiti spread out, like a puzzle she couldn't finish. The word that stuck with her wasn't rehearsal, it was complete. Meaning the next act wasn't preparation. It was the main event. The question was what he was rehearsing, and for who. Rachel Klein remained sedated at Hollow Creek Regional. She hadn't spoken again, not verbally, but she had drawn something during her last session with the hospital's trauma counselor. A sketch, barely coherent, of a theater, an actual one. Red curtains, rows of seats, a spotlight, and at the center of the stage a figure. No face, just the outline of one, like someone had taken a rubber eraser to the paper. And above it all, written in shaky pencil, THEAUDNCE docent TSEE. That was all Lena needed. She drove straight to the old Hollow Creek Playhouse. It had been shuttered for years. Once the pride of the county, small town productions, summer concerts, a stage where local kids pretended to be stars. Now it was a skeleton. Termites, mildew, cracked beams. But it still stood, and if you looked hard enough, you could still smell the fake smoke from the last Halloween play 10 years ago. Lena broke the lock herself. Walked in with nothing but a flashlight in her sidearm. The main hall was quiet. Dust, drenched. Rows of empty seats facing a stage that hadn't seen a soul in over a decade. But something was off. Too clean. The center easel had been swept. The stage had new planks laid down. Crude, mismatched wood, but sturdy. Atop it the same chair. The one from the videos. Stained. Familiar. Center stage. Framed by 2 red curtains someone had dragged out of storage and pinned up. And above it, hanging from the rafters, a handmade sign. Painted in crimson PRMIERE-ONIGHTONLY. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't looking at a hideout. She was looking at a venue. The FBI descended within the hour. Forensics swept the building. No fingerprints. No blood. No footprints. But what they did find was worse. In the dressing rooms behind the stage, someone had set up a kind of studio. Crude lighting rigs. Camera tripods. plastic sheeting stapled to the walls. Everything reeked of bleach. Hanging on one rack were clothes, costumes, dresses, suits, rags, all torn and resumed, each tagged with a name: Carrie, Milo, Mallory, Rachel. Costumes made from their clothing, or close approximations, as if someone was trying to be them, step into their skins, say what they never could. And on the makeup counter, next to a cracked mirror, a pile of glass eyes. Hundreds of them, labeled, stored like candies in little jars, some green, some blue, some brown, none matching. Beneath them, a note: "Own an of THM #TRUH." The press got wind of it. That's when Hollow Creek stopped pretending this was just a local story. Reporters flooded in. Every tabloid from coast to coast called it the eyeless stage killer. Articles ran headline after headline about the eyes, the staging, the performance. They were hungry for the next body, the next horror. As if the town had become a kind of feeding ground for the country's darkest curiosities. But for Lena, the noise was a distraction. She didn't care about the media. She cared about one thing: what was the truth he thought they could see, and what happened when he realized no one ever would. Then came the invitations, 10 of them, delivered in hand, painted black envelopes. No postage, no names, just left on doorsteps under windshield wipers, slipped through mail slots. Each addressed in the same handwriting that had haunted the town for months: "You have been chosen to see the truth. Please attend the final performance. August 14th, midnight. Hollow Creek Playhouse." No one knew who had received them. The envelopes vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Some claimed their neighbors burned them. Others claimed they never saw one at all. Rumors spread fast that the recipients were all connected, that they'd all testified against Jimmy Wade's mother when she was arrested in '98 for neglect, that they were former classmates, former doctors, former audiences to something they didn't understand. And Lena, she didn't get one. At least, not at first. It was August 12th when it arrived, tucked into the driver's seat of her cruiser. No note, no words. Just a black envelope with her name written in large, perfect cursive: Lena Harmon. Inside, a theater ticket, real cardstock, printed with golden ink, a Demonone TOTEND. She sat in the driver's seat for 3 minutes before starting the engine. The meaning was clear. He wanted her there. Wanted her to watch. Maybe as a warning. Maybe as punishment. Maybe because she was the only one who had ever really looked at him. Not the mask, not the file, not the footage, but the real thing, the fractured thing. But Lena didn't care why anymore. All she knew was this: whatever Jimmy Wade, Peter, was planning, it was already in motion. She couldn't stop it, but maybe she could witness it. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to end it. August 14th arrived with the weight of a funeral. That night, the town shut down before sunset. Restaurants closed early. Streets emptied. Even the air felt heavy, like the sky knew what was coming. Only Lena and a handful of agents from the FBI's behavioral unit stood outside the Hollow Creek Playhouse at 11:55 p.m. They didn't speak, didn't blink. Then, on the hour, the front doors opened, by themselves. No sound, no figure, just opened. And from inside, a single spotlight lit up the stage. The chair was empty, but not for long, because somewhere behind the curtains, someone was waiting. Someone who had written the script, built the set, picked the cast, and tonight he would show them all what the truth really looked like. At 12:01 a.m., Lena Harmon crossed the threshold of the Hollow Creek Playhouse. The air inside was colder than it should have been. Not just cold in temperature, cold like a morgue, like a place where things had been drained of life and left behind, but still whispered in the dark. The rows of seats were empty, untouched since the last storm of dust years ago. Yet the center aisle had been swept again. Cleared, prepared. Someone had made it perfect. The spotlight above the stage bathed the chair in sterile white. Behind it, the curtain was drawn just slightly, enough to suggest movement or the anticipation of it. But there was no figure. Not yet. Lena moved slowly, scanning the rows, each seat an open eye in the dark. Her service weapon was drawn, finger tight against the frame. Behind her, Agent Walker followed, scanning with his own light. The other agents stayed at the perimeter. Protocol. They had set up surveillance at every exit, drones overhead, tactical units hidden behind nearby trees. But Lena knew it wouldn't matter. Jimmy Wade didn't plan for escape. He planned for audience. And now, his audience had arrived. Taped to seat 23B, centered in the third row, was a manila folder. No name, no markings. Inside, photographs. Black and white. Blurry. Surveillance style. Each one showing someone watching. Not someone being watched. Watching. A woman staring through a window. A man looking over his shoulder. A child looking down a drain. But their eyes were wrong. Blacked out. Not edited. Defaced. Someone had taken a Sharpie and scraped them into pitch. Below each picture, a caption DDCCE. Arhatwanai ace he low key and far. Dubach ydn techuai tel el mini. Lena sifted through the images with growing unease. These weren't just victims. They were audiences. Witnesses to something Jimmy believed had meaning. Each of them had looked. Each had failed him. And so he'd silenced them in the only way he understood, by removing the instruments of deception. Eyes, mouths, faces. And now he wanted to know if she could finally see it. 12:05 a.m. The lights dimmed further, and the curtain parted. There was no dramatic music, no sudden movement, just a man, thin, tall, shoulders hunched like they were folding in on themselves, stepping into the light. He wore a stitched suit made from mismatched pieces. Denim sleeves, a torn flannel chest, trouser legs of two different colors. His hands were gloved, but not to hide fingerprints. The gloves were clear latex, blood-stained. But it was his face that froze Lena where she stood. He had no eyes. Where the sockets should have been, two polished, mirrored lenses reflected the spotlight back into the room, like glass domes. Shiny. Hollow. His mouth was wide, lipless, carved into a grotesque smile, painted in red across pale skin. The kind of smile a child might draw on a paper plate and wear for Halloween. But the mouth didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands and bowed. Jimmy Wade, Lena called. You need to stop this. Right now. The man straightened slowly, tilted his head, then raised one hand and pointed toward the ceiling. A projector buzzed to life above them. The wall behind the stage flickered with light, and then the reel began. What played next wasn't a film. It was a manifesto. Clips of eyes, still shots, some from known victims, others unknown. Each eye held too long on screen, the iris dilating, twitching, shaking. Then mouths, screaming, silent, some stitched, some wide open, mouthing words with no sound, cut with drawings, scribbles, chaos, a recurring symbol, a figure with no face, surrounded by mirrors, and then the voice began. The same voice from the tapes. Flat, detached, but louder now, as though speaking from inside their skulls. When I was small, I tried to look through other people. They always said what they didn't mean. Smiled when they were sad. Cried when they were angry. I didn't understand, so I started watching. I watched everything. But I never saw what they saw. The screen cut to a photo. Carrie Mathers. I took her eyes. I thought they would show me. But they were liars too. Milo. I listened to his silence. It screamed. I thought it would help. It didn't. Mallory, Rachel, Officer Danvers. Each followed by the same line, the truth is hidden behind the mask. The voice changed now. Louder. Urgent and then Lena. A still photo from years ago, her academy graduation. Smiling. But even you, detective, even you are hiding something. The lights snapped back on. The man with the mirrored eyes was gone. In his place, a new chair. This one was occupied. Rachel Klein, eyes wide, tears streaming, mouth still stitched, but she was awake, alert, strapped tight. And next to her, a pair of scissors. Lena surged forward. Agent Walker screamed after her, but it was too late. She was on the stage, moving with the practiced instinct of a woman, who'd kicked down more doors than she could remember. But the moment she touched Rachel, something hissed, gas venting from under the stage. Colorless, odorless, chloroform. A trap. Lena stumbled back, dizzy. Rachel collapsed, unconscious again. From behind the curtain, the voice boomed one final time, Th Shariso VR, BTHE TRDH, Ramayans, then silence. Total. By the time the other agents reached the stage, the trapdoor beneath the chair was open. Empty. Jimmy Wade had vanished again, leaving behind only Rachel, breathing, but barely, and a new note, pinned to the stage backdrop. Ondo ayo yulo fino asi imimi. Outside, Hollow Creek was quiet, but Lena knew better. The curtain hadn't dropped, it had risen. The town woke to panic, not because another body had been found, but because no one knew what to believe anymore. The official story from the Hollow Creek Police Department was that Rachel Klein had been rescued again. Alive, though sedated, and currently in protective custody. But the whispers outpaced the press releases. People were saying it wasn't really her on the stage, that something about her eyes was wrong, that her expression, even unconscious, looked hollow. Like the part of her that had once screamed for help had been carved out and replaced with something still watching. Others said the real Rachel had never made it out of the underground chamber, that the person sitting on stage was a replica, a mannequin, or worse, a person made to look like her. The theories multiplied like flies in a sealed box, and behind every one was the same nagging question. What exactly did Jimmy Wade want them to see? Lena didn't sleep for 48 hours. She stayed in the conference room at the FBI command center, replaying every frame of the theater footage, slowing it, enhancing it, searching for details the eye normally missed. But each time, she hit the same wall. He knew how to control what people saw. That was the horror of it. He wasn't just a killer. He was a director. He wrote the scene, he chose the lighting, and he told the audience where to look. But he never showed them everything. Lena paused the footage on frame 1192. Jimmy, Peter, was in full profile, head slightly tilted, hands at his sides, staring toward the crowd. His mirrored lenses reflected the spotlight perfectly. But just for a fraction of a second, caught in the lens was another reflection. A face. Not Rachel's. Not Lena's. Not any agent in the building. Someone behind the stage, watching him. They scrubbed the theater from top to bottom. Again, behind the curtains, beneath the floorboards, the underground trapdoor. Nothing. But in the rafters, duct taped to the underside of a light fixture, they found a camera. Still recording, not streaming. Stored footage only. The SD card had 3 hours of footage. The last file began 12 minutes before Lena entered the theater. It showed the stage, empty, still, quiet. Then Jimmy walked in, alone, calm, carrying the chair. He adjusted the spotlight himself, checked the angles. He practiced bowing 4 times, each time slower than the last. And then he turned to the empty rows, pulled off his mirrored mask, and spoke directly to the camera, not to the audience, to himself. I was born in a room with no windows. They said that's what made me sick, but I was already broken before I got here. My mother said I cried without sound. My father said my eyes never looked at him, even when I was staring straight ahead. He leaned closer. Do you know what it's like to see people lying every second they're awake? To know they don't even realize it. The mouth says one thing, the eyes say another, and the soul says nothing. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, because he didn't have them. I'm not trying to hurt anyone anymore. I just want to find one who isn't lying, one who sees me the way I see myself. He paused. I don't think she exists, so I'll make her. Lena froze the footage. That was it. The key. He wasn't hunting. He was sculpting, shaping people, carving them into something that could reflect him, something that would finally look back at him without lies. Not victims, auditions, and the playhouse. That wasn't the end. It was his first premiere. The pattern shifted again. A week passed with no new messages, no disappearances, No letters, but reports started trickling in from nearby counties. Unsettling, strange, but no one yet linking them to Hollow Creek. A woman in Colby Springs reported someone had been entering her house while she was at work. Nothing was stolen. Nothing moved. But her bathroom mirror had been cleaned every night, polished until the frame warped from moisture. A child in Fairhope woke screaming, telling his parents the man with the glass eyes had been standing at his window, watching, smiling, tapping the glass but making no sound. A dentist in Willow Bend received a package with no return address. Inside a mold of a mouth, not plastic, not resin, flesh, preserved in clear gel, real teeth, real tongue, human, no fingerprints on the box, no DNA, just a note she smiled wrong. Each case was small enough on its own to dismiss. But not to Lena. She mapped every location on a whiteboard and drew the connections. They formed a spiral, slowly coiling around Hollow Creek, then expanding outward, like a virus, a performance tour, or worse, a search pattern. And at the center of that spiral, the Haverhill Institute. She returned alone. The institute had been abandoned for years, defunded, deemed too cruel even by the standards of underfunded mental health programs. But Lena had walked its halls once before, early in her career, when a missing patient had turned up dead in the basement. Even back then, the building had felt wrong, like it remembered. Now, it felt worse. The floors creaked with the groan of memory. Every step sounded like it echoed down into years that refused to die. Lena walked the empty corridors with her flashlight catching glimpses of old furniture, water stains, and graffiti written by ghosts. And then she found it. Room 306, Jimmy's old cell. The door was locked, though the whole building had been condemned. She forced it open. Inside, the walls were painted, crudely, obsessively, with a single phrase, "I am, nada dabiro, I am." In the center of the room, a mirror, not a broken one, not dirty, perfectly polished, and in front of it another chair, empty. But on the seat, waiting, was a Polaroid. Lena's face, not recent, not from her office. From that night, the theater. Her mouth open, her expression frozen in shock as the curtain opened to reveal Rachel. Someone had photographed her from behind the stage, and written across the photo in red ink, "USAWME, BTDDUSEE har." The implication was unbearable. Had Rachel been a replica? Was she even alive? Was the girl rescued on the stage part of Jimmy's twisted cast? Was she watching from behind the mirror, like he used to, waiting to be chosen? Or worse, had he succeeded? Had he finally made someone who saw him the way he wanted to be seen? Someone who understood? Someone who would help him keep going? Lena staggered out of the room, heart pounding, her mind spinning faster than her training could contain. Everything she thought she knew was coming apart. This wasn't just about catching Jimmy Wade. This was about stopping the spread. Because if he had made someone who believed in him, he wouldn't need to kill anymore. They would do it for him. And Hollow Creek, it wasn't the stage anymore. It was just the opening act. She came through the front door like she'd lived there all her life. 3:47 a.m. Lena Harmon was just dozing off in the corner of the precinct's war room, her eyes red, shoulders hunched in that sleep, deprived curve only long-term investigators develop. The room was dark except for the glow of 2 monitors looping through crime scene stills and Rachel Klein's blank stare. Then came the sound. Not the alarm, not a crash, just the creak of the front door, slowly closing. Lena's hand moved to her weapon instantly, and she was on her feet before her boots fully hit the tile. She emerged into the lobby with her gun raised and her heart punching her ribs. The girl was standing in the center of the room, 13, maybe 14. Pale skin, long black hair matted like it hadn't been washed in days. She wore a hospital gown 3 sizes too big, the fabric hanging off her shoulders like melted skin. Barefoot, 2 nails caked with dirt, and her eyes, they weren't scared, not confused, not vacant, they were watching. She smiled before Lena could speak, a wide, slow, crooked smile. And then she said it, He told me to bring you a message. They called her Case Zero. Her real name was Ava Mercer. Missing since June. No connections to Hollow Creek. No ties to Jimmy Wade. She was last seen walking home from a sleepover in Sandville, a town nearly 90 miles away. Her case had gone cold until now. The girl had no memory of how she got to the Hollow Creek precinct. At least, that's what she told them. But she remembered everything else. She described Jimmy Wade without prompting. Not just his appearance, his voice, his habits. The way he hummed when he was about to cut. The way he kept the lights low in every room. But always had a mirror, so he could tell if the face was still working. She said he never touched her, never hurt her. He fed her, talked to her, taught her things. Taught you what? Lena asked, gently. Ava's smile widened. How to see people for what they really are. Her psych evaluation went from routine to urgent in a matter of hours. She passed every cognitive test. Above average IQ. No signs of trauma response. No classic PTSD, no crying. No panic attacks. But she drew, compulsively. Every surface she was given, paper, table, even her own arm, she filled with eyes. Not cartoonish, not abstract, perfect, anatomical, human. Different shapes, different shades. Some crying, some sewn shut, some staring directly ahead. When asked what they meant, she simply said, I'm remembering them. When asked who them was, she said, the ones who didn't pass the audition. They kept her in a secured wing at Hollow Creek Medical under 24-hour surveillance. Lena visited her 4 times in the first day alone. Each time, Ava said less, but her drawings grew more detailed. The last one chilled Lena more than any crime scene she'd ever walked into. A stage. Just like the theater. But instead of one chair, there were 12, all filled, each with a person missing something: eyes, mouth, ears, nose. Above the stage, a single mirror. And in it, Jimmy Wade, smiling. But behind him in the corner of the reflection was another figure. Small, slouched, Ava. Lena started to believe what she hadn't dared voice before: Jimmy had done it. He'd succeeded, not in building the perfect victim, but in recruiting. Ava Mercer wasn't just a survivor. She was his student. Then came the second message. This time, not a tape, not a letter, a phone call to Lena's personal number, 209 a.m. No caller ID, no background noise, just breathing. And then, a voice. Not Jimmy's, a girl's. Why do you only chase the monster you can see? What if the mirror made more than one? Click. The call traced back to a disconnected line. Burned SIM card. A dead zone of tech. But Lena didn't care about the logistics anymore. She was watching the beginning of a shift. Jimmy Wade wasn't just building scenes. He was building followers. And maybe he didn't need to be there in person anymore. Maybe he was building something bigger. A movement. Over the next 5 days, 5 more children went missing. All between the ages of 10 and 14, all in different counties, all with no physical connection to each other. And all of their families received the same item on the night their child vanished: a drawing of an eye, nothing else. No note, no envelope, just the drawing. Some were left taped to windows, others slid under doors. One was folded inside a school lunchbox. The press started calling it the Seeing Game, and Lena felt her chest cave in just a little more every hour. Because this wasn't a murder case anymore. It was a replication. Back in Ava's hospital room, Lena sat across from the girl and placed the most recent drawing on the table. Ava didn't even blink. That's Benji, she said softly. He couldn't stop blinking when Jimmy told him not to. You know where he is? Lena asked. I knew where he was, Ava replied. Then, staring directly into Lena's eyes, but that's not where he stays. It was all Lena could do not to slam her fists on the table. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake the truth out of this girl's painted smile, but she couldn't. Because deep down, in the hollow between her ribs, where instinct and horror live side by side, Lena knew something Ava didn't need to say. Benji was already gone. Not dead, but gone. Taken into the next act of Jimmy Wade's design. because Jimmy hadn't created a masterpiece in his madness. He had created a blueprint, and others were already building from it. The following morning, they found Benji's shoes, neatly placed on the edge of a frozen pond 15 miles outside of Hollow Creek. Size 6, mud-caked soles, tied together at the laces and balanced like they'd been left with care. The ground around them was undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, no tire tracks, just those shoes and nearby, a paper crane folded from construction paper. Inside the crane, another drawing, this one different, not just an eye, but a full face. Benji's, crudely drawn in pencil. But the face was split down the middle like a mirror cracked in half. One side had an eye wide open, the mouth stitched shut. The other side had the mouth open in a silent scream, and the eye gouged out with thick, dark scribbles. On the back of the page, in childlike handwriting, Eshi Koil DND DCETOB Slim. By now, the FBI's entire child abduction rapid deployment team had taken over the operation. They had facial recognition, software scanning traffic cams, drones monitoring roads, analysts dissecting Jimmy Wade's every moment in the Haverhill Institute from old VHS tapes and buried therapist notes. But they were chasing smoke. Every lead came up dry. Every house search yielded nothing. Every missing child evaporated like mist on glass. But Lena saw it happening. Right there in front of everyone. The pattern. The escalation. The formula. Jimmy had left the script behind. Now others were following it, word for word. The children weren't random. They were all sensitive, isolated, introverted. Some had diagnoses. One with undiagnosed autism. Another flagged for reactive attachment disorder. One with a history of trauma. They were just like Jimmy once was. And that's what made them perfect. Not as victims, but as candidates. It wasn't long before another child appeared. Not missing, returning. 12-year-old Maddie Renner had vanished from her home in Stillwater 2 weeks earlier. Her face had been on every milk carton and news feed across 3 states. Her mother had aged 10 years in half a month. And then, without warning, Maddie was found sitting on the steps of a church in Albany. Alone, dressed in a white gown. Her hair braided in a pattern her mother didn't recognize. No injuries, no signs of struggle. But she wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, wouldn't make eye contact. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. When police tried to move her, she resisted, but not with force. She just sank, like dead weight, like every muscle had agreed to shut down at once. In her pocket was a small laminated card, a C Pasadena. Lena flew to Albany that night. She sat across from Maddie in the sterile quiet of a hospital psych ward. The room so silent you could hear the flicker of fluorescent bulbs overhead. Maddie said nothing for nearly an hour. Then, as Lena started to stand up to leave, she spoke. "He says you don't see him yet." Lena froze mid-step. Maddie shook her head once. Not him anymore. Then who? A pause. A slow blink. And then a single word, OS. That word twisted something inside Lena. Not me. Us. There wasn't just one voice in Maddie's head now. There was a chorus. And Jimmy's legacy, whatever it was, had become shared. Infected. The clinical psychologists who evaluated Maddie were baffled. No signs of malnutrition. No sedation markers in her blood. Brain scans came back clean. She was physically unharmed. But her EEG showed something unusual. Her brain was active even during what should have been idle states. REM patterns while awake. Dreamlike pulses behind her eyes. "She's awake," the attending neurologist told Lena, "but it's like she's living in a trance." Lena leaned over the girl that night, as nurses whispered just outside the door. She stared into Maddie's face, not cruel, not scared, just empty. And then Maddie whispered something so quiet it felt like a breath from a grave. "Don't look for us in the dark. That's not where we're hiding." 3 more children vanished in 2 days, each from a different town, each from a home that had its locks intact and no signs of break-in. Each family received something new, not a drawing, but a piece of clothing laid out on the bed, folded precisely. A shirt, a sock, a mitten. Inside each a photo. The missing child asleep in their own bed, taken the night before. This wasn't about death anymore. This was recruitment. Indoctrination. Jimmy had shifted from the killer in the shadows to the teacher in the mirror. And what he'd once tried to understand through violence, he was now passing down like gospel. He'd stopped trying to see the truth in others. Now he was building it in them. Back in Hollow Creek, Ava Mercer had stopped speaking again, but she had started building something in her room, using tissues, cotton balls, tape, anything she could find. When Lena entered one morning, the entire floor was covered in tiny chairs. Handmade, crude, some no bigger than a coffee cup. Dozens of them, facing the mirror. Lena asked her what they were. Ava didn't look up. She just said, "Seats for the ones who pass." Lena stepped outside and threw up. She wasn't just chasing a killer anymore. She was chasing a belief system. A movement growing in silence, spreading through invisible threads. She had once imagined Jimmy Wade sitting in a dark room, cutting eyes from those who couldn't see what he did. But now she saw the truth. He wasn't trying to see anymore. He was trying to be seen. Everywhere, by everyone, through others. He had become a virus that wears faces. And the faces, they were getting younger. The town of Hollow Creek no longer slept at night. Not because people feared the killer. They had learned long ago that fear wasn't protection. It was the silence they feared now. The stillness. The feeling that someone, or something, was always watching. That if they closed their eyes too long, they might wake up somewhere else or not wake at all. Porch lights stayed on from dusk till dawn. Curtains stayed shut. Children were walked to school in pairs, if they went at all. Some families packed up in the middle of the night, leaving behind half-furnished homes like they'd been warned in a language no one could hear, but everyone understood. And then, just when it felt like the town couldn't get quieter, it did, because someone took their voices. It started with Kyle Mercer, Ava's younger brother. He was found standing in the middle of their backyard at 2:13 in the morning, eyes wide, mouth sealed shut, not by tape or suture, but by his own doing. He'd tied a scarf around his face so tight it left bruises across both cheeks. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't cry, wouldn't make a sound, even when his parents begged him. He just stared straight ahead, into the darkness beyond the fence line, trembling. Later, in the hospital, they untied him gently. His lips were dry, cracked. When a nurse offered him water, he whispered a single phrase, "She told me if I talked, he'd find me again." The doctors assumed trauma, psychological stress from his sister's disappearance and return. But Lena knew better. She knew because Kyle wasn't alone. By the end of the week, 4 more children across different counties had been admitted for voluntary silence. Not the sullen quiet of depression. This was different. Organized, deliberate. They had bound their mouths, with scarves, with duct tape, one even with glue. They all said the same thing. "She told me." She said, "Don't talk." She said, "He watches from sound now." One of them had carved a symbol into his bedroom wall. A cracked mirror. Lena stood in Ava Mercer's room the next morning, staring at the girl who'd started all of this. She sat on her bed, legs crossed, head tilted slightly to the right, eyes fixed on a mirror taped to the closet door. The reflection was warped from the tape holding it up. Every so often, she'd blink, smile, whisper something only the glass could hear. Lena asked her gently, "Are you the one telling them not to speak?" Ava smiled wider. "Not me," she said. "Her." "Who's her?" A pause. Then she's the one he made when he couldn't make himself. The hospital's psych team labeled it a dissociative personality construct, some form of split identity behavior Ava had developed under psychological pressure. But Lena had seen enough. The girl wasn't broken. She wasn't hallucinating. She was repeating, mimicking, like a child reciting lines from a play long after the curtain had fallen. Or worse, before the next one rose. The next day, the sound began. It started low, barely audible, like a shortwave radio static that only kids could hear. Parents didn't notice it at first, but students at Hollow Creek Middle School started complaining about the hum. They said it came from the PA system, even when it was off. They said it made their teeth feel like they were shaking, that it talked without words. Teachers dismissed it as viral TikTok nonsense, until 3 students, completely unconnected, stood up during a reading period and began tearing the classroom mirrors off the walls. Not violently. Carefully, as if they were afraid the mirrors might bite if handled wrong. When asked why, one girl simply said, "We weren't looking at ourselves. We were looking at him." Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment with every light on, every mirror covered in brown butcher paper. She didn't know if it mattered. She didn't care. She stared at the files in front of her, every one filled with the same scribbled sketches, repeated words, and empty expressions. There was no clear motive anymore. No endgame. Jimmy Wade hadn't just infected people. He'd erased something. A line. A boundary. A rule that said monsters stay in the dark and good people find the light. Now the light had mirrors, and the mirrors had doors. And people were walking through. Then came the first ritual. That's what the media called it. Ritual. The word danced between drama and drape, but Lena knew it wasn't for theatrics. It was a script. A family in Morton Creek woke up to find their front yard rearranged. Dozens of dolls, plastic, fabric, wooden, were seated in rows facing their porch. Each one had its eyes blacked out with marker. At the top step, a child-sized chair, empty. On the door taped in the center, "W. Arado Tubugian." The FBI's behavioral analysis unit was spiraling. They couldn't track a person anymore. This wasn't Jimmy Wade. It was ideas. And ideas don't leave fingerprints. Ideas don't hide in basements. Ideas don't get tired or sloppy or leave trails of blood. They evolve. And then the tapes returned. VHS. 3 of them delivered to different cities. Not to law enforcement, to public libraries. Each labeled with a single word scrawled in thick black marker, "La OK." Lena had the Hollow Creek tape transferred and reviewed in a secured lab. The footage was primitive, low res, no audio. A single shot, Ava Mercer, sitting in a white room, eyes wide open, not blinking. Behind her, a mirror. The reflection didn't match. In the mirror, Ava was smiling. On the tape, her face was still. The smile in the mirror moved first. The footage looped. At Hodger 0423, a shadow entered the room behind her. In the mirror. But never in the real frame. It leaned close. A head. Hollow eyes. A mouth sewn shut but twitching. A presence that shouldn't have existed. And as it moved, the camera glitched. Words flashed on screen. Too fast to read. Lena had them extracted frame by frame. One phrase, broken across 13 frames. Af yau si I'm hasi si yau yu busi k. That night, Lena covered every mirror in her office. Again. She took the tape home with her. She stared at it. And she thought, not for the first time, this isn't about catching Jimmy anymore. It never was. It was about who'd saw him first and who would see him last. They started blinking in unison. That was the first sign something irreversible had happened to the children. It started in the Hollow Creek Middle School cafeteria. A teacher, Ms. Delaney, noticed it first. A dozen students sitting quietly at the same table, untouched food in front of them, eyes wide. Then, together, like a sequence had been programmed into their bodies, they blinked. Not once randomly, but all at once, 3 times. Blink. 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 Perfectly timed. Mechanical. She thought it was a joke. Some new trend. A silent protest. But when she approached the table and asked what they were doing, none of them looked up. They just stared ahead, mouths closed, heads slightly tilted. And then one of them whispered, "If we don't blink right, he gets in." By the time Lena got to the school, Ms. Delaney was crying in the parking lot. She didn't know why. She said everything felt wrong. The hallways too narrow, the lights too quiet. The mirrors in the bathroom suddenly angled to reflect corners they weren't supposed to. She said she looked into one and saw her own face standing behind her, smiling. When Lena checked the mirror herself, it was just a mirror. But she still covered it before she left. Inside the school, 5 more students were pulled into questioning. Same symptoms, same behavior. Fixed eye contact, synchronized blinking, rhythmic tapping of their fingers on their desks. And when Lena asked what they were doing, a boy named Elias, skinny, barely 10, with a buzz cut and a band, 8 across his cheek, whispered something that made the agent beside Lena drop her pen. It's not about what he sees. What is it about Elias? Lena asked softly. His mouth twitched into the beginning of a grin. It's about what we let him see through us. Every therapist, every profiler, every child behaviorist brought in to help just stared blankly at the data. The clinical explanation didn't match the emotional reality. There was no mass psychosis, no chemical imbalance, no trauma link that made sense. But the symptoms were spreading, fast, not just in Hollow Creek anymore. Children in 3 surrounding counties had begun showing the same signs. First the silence, then the drawing, then the mirror fixation, and now the blinking. Lena sat in her car outside the school, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror, and asked herself the question she'd been avoiding since Ava Mercer walked back into her life. What if Jimmy Wade wasn't trying to build something? What if he was trying to open something? Back at the Hollow Creek precinct, the old boards of photos and victim timelines had been replaced with sketches, patterns, rhythm charts. The team was no longer tracking a killer. They were tracking a language, one built through repetition, the same way cults build prayer, the same way children learn nursery rhymes. One of the analysts, a man who used to work in behavioral linguistics, stood up during the meeting and said flatly, "This isn't behavior anymore. It's choreography." And Lena knew he was right. The children weren't just mimicking. They were participating. That same night, something changed. For months, every sign had been symbolic, eyes missing, drawings, silent messages. But this was different. This was direct. Lena arrived home at 11:19 p.m., found her front door unlocked. Inside nothing was touched, no signs of forced entry, no items missing. But on her kitchen table sat a small, rectangular mirror. Pristine, framed in black, and written in red across the glass, smeared with 2 small fingerprints DOUSER white. Not him, her, the phrase Ava had spoken, the one that made her voice change. That turned a traumatized girl into something watching back. Lena didn't touch the mirror. She didn't cover it. She just sat across from it in the dark and stared. And for a moment, only a moment, she thought the reflection blinked before she did. The next morning, another child returned. Not by choice. 8-year-old Davy Harlow was found walking down Highway 27, barefoot, dressed in a hospital gown identical to the one Ava Mercer had worn. Blood on his fingertips, dirt under his nails. His mouth stitched closed with black thread, but the skin was unbroken. The thread was looped through his lips, like it had been placed but never pulled tight. He wasn't in pain. He was smiling. When surgeons carefully removed the thread, he opened his mouth and let out a long, dry breath. Not a scream, a laugh. He told them about the room, said it was all white, like clouds, said she was there, not Jimmy, the girl in the mirror. He called her the copy. She walks like me, he said. Talks like me, but she's older, like she's lived more days in the same skin. He said she showed him pictures of other children, other rooms, other chairs, and one picture of a face with no features. Not blank, just empty. She told me if I could make my face still, I could stay. What happens if you move? Lena asked him. Davy went quiet. Then whispered, then I'm not me anymore. That night, Hollow Creek suffered its first blackout. Every light, every house, every generator shut down at 2:03 a.m. Entire neighborhoods cloaked in darkness. Emergency calls flooded the switchboards, but no one could describe what they were afraid of. They all said the same thing. The dark isn't the part that scares me. It's the mirrors. When power returned, entire streets had smashed every reflective surface in their homes. Shards on porches. Basements filled with broken glass. But one house was different. A small home on the edge of Pinewood Lane. Inside, every mirror left intact. Polished. Framed with candles. And in the bathroom, a message carved into the mirror with something sharp. We have some tok ing. Ifmo stop, ashigat yets o ute. Lena stood in that bathroom until the sun came up. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She stared at the message, the mirror, and her own face behind it. She thought about Ava, about Davy, about Jimmy, and she realized something terrifying. He had never wanted to escape. He'd wanted to bring something through. And now, he had. Only it didn't wear his face anymore. It wore theirs. And it was still learning how to be seen. It wasn't a question of whether it had crossed over. It was when. The shift was no longer subtle. It had roots now, deep, hidden roots curling beneath the town like veins under pale skin. People felt it. Not just the children. Adults too. Teachers, nurses, parents, strangers on the street. Something invisible, crawling just behind their thoughts. A pressure. A presence. The sensation of being watched when they were alone, and watched harder when they weren't. Lena felt it most in the quiet moments, those rare pockets of stillness between chaos. Brushing her teeth in the mirror, glancing at her reflection in store windows, hearing her voice echo slightly off in the wrong direction during late-night phone calls. The wrongness was spreading, and it no longer needed Jimmy Wade's hands to guide it. Whatever he had tried to reach, it had reached back. The Hollow Creek Gazette ran a story titled "Town Held Hostage" by its own silence. But it wasn't silence that had gripped them. It was mimicry. People had started acting strangely, not screaming or violent, not overtly dangerous, just off. A neighbor waves at the same time every morning. Rain or shine, never blinking. A mother speaks in whispers to her baby, even when no one's listening. A man stands perfectly still in the aisle of a grocery store for 19 minutes, staring at his reflection in the freezer door. They all say they're fine. They all smile when asked. But Lena knew a rehearsed scene when she saw one. They weren't living. They were performing. On Tuesday, Lena received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a DVD. No label. Just a handwritten note: "You've been chosen to direct the next act." She played the video on an isolated laptop at the precinct. What she saw changed everything. It was footage, grainy and jittering, from what looked like a basement, similar to the first room Jimmy used in his early tapes. But this wasn't old. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago. In the frame, a group of children, 8 of them, sitting in a circle, holding hands, eyes closed, mouths closed. Every child had a mirror behind them, propped up against the wall. But it was what happened in the reflections that made Lena's hands go cold. In the mirrors, the children weren't still. They were moving, smiling, whispering, laughing, but only in the reflections. And then the camera panned to the doorway. Someone was standing there, watching, wearing a mask that wasn't a mask. It was a human face. Too smooth, too blank, with holes where the eyes and mouth should have been. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stared. Lena called the FBI. They ran facial recognition on the children. 5 had been declared missing over the past 2 weeks. 3 were still listed as runaways. But the parents of one, a boy named Landon Veers, insisted they'd seen him just yesterday. At the grocery store, picking out cereal with his father. Lena pulled the security footage from the store. Landon was there, but he didn't look at anything. Didn't speak, didn't interact. He stood beside his father, head tilted, smiling into the reflection of the frozen food aisle. And for 2 frames, just 2, his reflection smiled first. Lena drove to the Veers house personally. She had to see the boy, ask him questions, confirm if what she feared was true. But when she arrived, Landon's mother answered the door with a blank, practiced smile. Landon's not home right now, she said. Do you know where he is? He's at rehearsal. Lena paused. Rehearsal? The woman blinked, once slowly. It's almost showtime, and then she closed the door. Lena stood frozen on the porch. Not because of what the woman had said, but because as the door clicked shut, she caught a glimpse of the hallway mirror behind her. There were two Landons in it, one standing beside his mother, the other standing behind her, smiling. That night, every mirror in the precinct was covered. Protocol. No exceptions. Even the rearview mirrors in patrol cars were blacked out with duct tape. Officers joked about it at first, calling it a ghost hunt or a town-wide psychotic break. But none of them removed the tape. No one dared look anymore. Not after what happened to Officer Grady. He was on night watch at the hospital. Assigned to Ava Mercer's room. She hadn't moved in days. Not visibly. Just sat in her bed, eyes locked on the mirror across from her. The doctors had been ordered not to remove it. The psych team insisted it was part of her process. But Lena knew it was more than that. It was part of his process now. Grady made the mistake of glancing into the mirror when he adjusted Ava's IV drip. Just a second, maybe less. But when he looked away, Ava was standing beside him, smiling. And when he turned his head to confirm what he was seeing, she was still in the bed, still unmoved. Grady didn't return to work. He quit that night, packed his things, left town. No one heard from him again. The last text he sent Lena read, "Whatever you're chasing, it's not human anymore." And then came the show flyer, delivered to every doorstep in Hollow Creek, plain white paper, simple black font, no graphics, no frills. Opamingi IGH to Oni Nationella August 30th 11:11 p.m. TD Marars Tegius Redu. No address, no explanation. But every child in town seemed to understand where to go, and they all smiled when asked about it. Lena knew what this was. The end of Act 1. Jimmy's death, or disappearance, hadn't ended the performance. It had licensed it. And the children, the mirrors, the empty smiles, they were the cast now. They were rehearsed. They were ready. And when the curtain finally rose, there wouldn't be an audience left. Only reflections. The sky was the wrong shade of black that night. It was the kind of black that didn't belong to nature. Not moonless, not starless. Just empty, like something had reached down and wiped the sky clean with a wet rag. As if whatever was coming had cleared the stage above, too, because it wanted all the focus down here, where the lights would soon flicker on and the show would finally begin. August 30th, 11:11 p.m. Every clock in Hollow Creek ticked toward it like a heartbeat winding down. No one slept. Parents sat by windows clutching kitchen knives, holding hands. Some cried without knowing why. Others kept their eyes on their children, watching for something, anything, that looked like a cue to leave town forever. But the children didn't run. They just smiled. They were calm, ready. Because they already knew where the stage was. Lena Harmon stood outside the old pump house, just past the tree line near the Hollow Creek quarry. It was abandoned, on paper. The rusted chain link fence that surrounded it had been cut, the ground inside littered with small footprints. Some bare, some in children's sneakers, some not quite human. Not exactly footprints, but shapes. Distorted, elongated. Like something was learning how to walk the way people do. She wasn't alone. The FBI had brought drones, tactical teams, surveillance vans lined with gear. But the ground around them felt cursed. Not just heavy, but performative. Like stepping onto a set mid-scene and realizing you're the only one who doesn't know the script. Inside the pump house, they found the entrance. A door, not old, not rusted, a new one, steel. Bolted from the outside, not in. A symbol burned into it. The cracked mirror they'd seen carved into so many walls, drawn by so many small hands. And above it, written in ash none OACTERSPONDSNT, they breached the door at exactly 11:08 p.m. Behind it was a corridor, stone walls, recently cleaned, lit by dim overhead bulbs that buzzed like insects. The floor was wet with condensation, reflecting the agent's movements like a shattered funhouse mirror. Then came the sound. Not music, not voices, breathing, dozens of them. Ragged, uneven, but somehow synchronized. And then, faintly, from deeper within, children humming. The same tune they'd heard in earlier tapes. That sick, lopsided rhyme, see no evil, hear no sound. Cut the face and stitch it down. One agent vomited in the hallway. Lena pressed forward. She already knew what they'd find. She just didn't know how deep it would go. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. It should not have existed. Beneath the old pump house was a theater, a real one. Hand-built wooden seats arranged in a crescent around a stage raised 2 feet off the ground. Spotlights fashioned from construction lights, duct taped to PVC pipes. The curtain. Thick black trash bags stitched together and dyed red, and seated in every row children. Dozens, maybe more, eyes wide open, unblinking. All facing the stage. On it, nothing, just a tall mirror, gilded in fake gold. Standing upright like a shrine. The children didn't flinch when the agents entered. They didn't blink when lights were turned on, or when voices called out. They just watched. Then one child stood. A girl. Ava Mercer. She walked to the center of the stage with that, too, smooth glide that looked like it belonged to something pretending to be a child. She turned to the audience, not the children, but the agents, the adults, Lena, and smiled. No words, just that same knowing, empty smile. Then she pointed at the mirror and whispered, "She's ready." The mirror shimmered, just once, like heat rising off pavement. Then it darkened, slowly, like ink spreading across its surface. The reflection of the room faded, replaced by a different one. Another room, another stage, another Lena, staring back. Only this version wasn't holding a gun, wasn't standing among agents. She was alone, smiling. And behind her, in the reflection, were children too, but they weren't seated. They were crawling toward her on all fours, eyes gouged, mouths sewn. The real Lena staggered back. The mirror stayed black. Ava reached out and touched the surface, and the darkness rippled, pulling slightly at her fingers like water. She turned back to the room. "They're ready for their lines," she said. "But first we have to forget yours." Then, she looked straight at Lena and mouthed a single word. "Blink." The lights went out. Total black. Screams filled the chamber, mostly the adults. Guns fired, flashlights flared, voices shouted names, but the children didn't move. Not a muscle. Only when the lights came back 60 seconds later did the horror become fully visible. Every agent in the room was on the floor, eyes wide open, mouths grinning. Not dead, not alive, frozen, like puppets strung up by an unseen hand. And the children, they were standing now, in rows, facing Lena. Ava stepped forward, but her face had changed. No longer hers. It was Jimmy's, but wrong. Feminine, taller, hair lengthened, mouth wider, a fusion of every child who had disappeared, every adult who had stared too long. A face that didn't belong to any one body, but all of them at once. And in a voice that echoed across the stage like the last gasp of a dying world, she spoke. "You made this real by watching. You gave it shape by believing. You gave me life by not looking away." Lena raised her weapon, hands shaking, but she couldn't fire, because in the mirror behind the monster she saw herself, smiling, waiting, wanting to join. The mirror pulsed. A hum vibrated in Lena's skull, and then she blinked. Once. When she opened her eyes, the theater was empty. No children, no bodies, no mirror. She stood alone on the stage, a single spotlight burning overhead. And in the front row, sitting upright in the very center seat, was Jimmy Wade. Only he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked afraid. And he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "I didn't bring her through. I just opened the door." The lights shut off again, and this time the darkness breathed. Lena Harmon had stared down murderers, stalkers, arsonists, people who carved their madness into the world with knives and fire and power. But she had never stood in a darkness that felt alive, never one that listened. The air in the underground theater didn't just fill the lungs. It crawled into them, inch by inch, thick and heavy, as if it wanted to live there, like it was testing her, tasting her. The silence that followed Jimmy Wade's voice wasn't emptiness. It was waiting. He sat in the front row alone, hands folded, head slightly tilted, like a man who just realized the monster he'd invited to dinner had learned how to use the fork. "I didn't want this," Jimmy whispered again, voice thin, cracking. "Not like this." But Lena didn't move. She didn't speak. Because in the seconds since the lights had returned, her mind hadn't caught up. It couldn't. Not with the impossible. Because this man, this boy in a man's body, this architect of all her nightmares, looked small, hollow, not monstrous, afraid. And for the first time, Lena realized Jimmy Wade hadn't become the thing she was chasing. He had become its first victim. "You let her out," she said softly, finally. Jimmy nodded. "I was trying to make someone who could see what I saw. I thought, if I could find the face that told the truth, if I could build the right one, she'd go away. But she didn't. She learned." He looked up at Lena, and his eyes weren't filled with madness anymore. They were begging. "She watches through the mirrors, but it's not just reflections anymore. She doesn't need them. She likes them. They make her stronger. But now she can watch through us. The kids, mostly. But not just them. Anyone who's seen too much." He paused. "Then, flatly, you saw too much Lena. She wanted to pull the trigger. Not out of anger. Not revenge. She wanted to end him. Not because he was the monster, but because he'd given it shape. He had pulled something from the dark corners of his own shattered mind, tried to sculpt it, tried to worship it, and in doing so, opened a door that couldn't be closed. But her hand stayed frozen, not by mercy, by fear. Because what if Jimmy wasn't lying? What if killing him didn't end it? What if he was the only one who understood how to survive her? Jimmy stood slowly, hands raised in surrender. The spotlight above the stage followed him like it was waiting for his cue. "She's not in one place anymore," he whispered. "She's in rehearsals. Over and over. Through the children. Through the smiles. Through the stillness. They rehearse her until she gets it right. Until she figures out how to live here, not just be seen." Lena stared at him. "And what happens when she gets it right?" Jimmy looked down at his feet. Then, quietly, she writes her own script. A low hum filled the chamber. Not electrical, not mechanical, organic. Like a throat clearing in the back of a theater. The spotlight overhead flickered, and Lena saw it again. The mirror. It was back. Not whole, cracked across the center like a wound that refused to close. But still standing, still reflecting. And in its broken pieces, Lena saw a dozen versions of herself, smiling, crying, bleeding, mouthing words she hadn't said yet. She turned to Jimmy. "Is there a way to stop her?" His eyes filled with tears. Not the messy sobs of a madman, but quiet, desperate grief. "There was," he said, "before I taught her what we are. And now," he shook his head, "she wants to be remembered now. That's how she stays. Every child who draws her. Every mother who dreams of her. Every headline that says her name. That's how she grows teeth." Then came the knock. Not from a door. From the mirror. A single, slow, deliberate knock from the other side of the glass. Jimmy gasped. "She's not supposed to do that yet." The mirror rippled again. A hand pressed against the inside of the glass. Small, delicate, pale. It pushed outward. The surface bulged. Lena raised her weapon, finally steady, finally certain. But Jimmy lunged. Not at her, but toward the mirror. "No, don't shoot! If you break it while she's still inside, she scatters!" Lena hesitated, and that was enough time for the hand to push through. The glass didn't shatter. It parted like a curtain, fluid and silent. A girl stepped out, but not Ava, not Rachel, not anyone Lena recognized. She looked 12, maybe 13, hair black as oil, skin pale, almost translucent. Her mouth was sewn shut, not crudely, but elegantly, like embroidery. Her eyes were the only part of her that moved. flicking from Lena to Jimmy, then back to Lena. And she smiled. It was the smile that broke something inside Lena, because it was grateful, like they had finally finished building her. Like the play was over, and she had taken her bow. Jimmy fell to his knees. "She doesn't need me anymore," he said. Then, to the girl, "Please. I was trying to help you see." She cocked her head, knelt in front of him, and kissed his forehead, just once, before reaching around his back and drawing something in the air with her finger. Lena didn't see what it was, but Jimmy Wade froze in place, not dead, not unconscious, paused, a still image, mouth open, eyes wide. Then the girl stood, turned to Lena, and held out her hand. "Why?" Lena whispered, gun trembling again. The girl didn't answer. She just pointed at the ceiling, then at Lena's chest, then at the mirror, and the room shifted. Suddenly, Lena was standing alone. Jimmy was gone. The girl was gone. The stage was gone. She was back in the precinct, lights humming overhead, her desk in front of her, a note resting atop her files. Handwritten, one sentence. The final act begins when they forget it was ever a show. And behind her, in the glass of the window, her own reflection blinked half a second too late. Not just names or headlines, everything. As if the weight of memory had finally snapped and left nothing but quiet, smiling wreckage in its place. Hollow Creek awoke on September 1st to a stunning calm. No sirens, no lockdowns, no meetings in the town hall, no FBI presence. No discussions about missing children, not even whispers. It was as if the last 9 months had been a fever dream, peeled from the collective mind like dead skin. The news stations had scrubbed their databases. The national feeds carried nothing. Jimmy Wade, Ava Mercer, Rachel Klein, gone. No missing person bulletins, no obituaries, no video footage, no old articles archived in digital corners. Lena Harmon stood in the middle of the precinct's archive room and stared at shelves that should have been bursting with files. Photos, autopsy reports, psychological profiles, and found instead row after row of empty binders. Every drawer she opened was silent. Every memory she tried to conjure was muffled, like someone had taken an eraser to the inside of her skull. And yet, she remembered. She remembered everything. She remembered the chair on the stage and the girl who blinked out of rhythm. She remembered the humming, the mirror, the knock, and she remembered Jimmy, frozen in time, mouth open in surrender, as if even the idea of him had been overwritten. But the others, the agents who had seen the stage, the techs, the analysts, the survivors, gone, not dead, not missing. They were here, smiling, living, chatting at cafes, driving their kids to school, but wrong, empty behind the eyes. Like actors who'd lost their script and decided to improvise a personality based on a whisper. When Lena asked Walker, her partner for 12 years, about the theater, he blinked slowly and said, "Oh, you mean the one they tore down in the 90s?" and smiled. Just like the others, it wasn't mass amnesia. It was something worse. It was rewriting. Whatever had stepped through that mirror hadn't needed to destroy anyone. It simply removed their lines from the story, and now the story was playing on without them. Lena didn't sleep for the next 72 hours. She tore apart her apartment, searching for physical proof of what had happened. Notes, scribbles, transcripts. The photo of Ava's drawings she'd once kept tucked behind her dresser mirror. Nothing. The mirror had been wiped clean. No dust. No fingerprints. Just her face. And every time she looked into it, she had the sickening feeling that the version staring back was just a little faster, like it was trying to remember how to be her. She started carrying a camera everywhere, not for safety, for comparison. She took pictures of herself every morning, in the mirror, in windows, in anything that reflected, then printed them out and tacked them to her kitchen wall. After a week, there were 38. Only 33 matched. 5 of them, subtly, were wrong. One had pupils too dilated for the morning light. Another had her smiling when she swore she wasn't. One had a tear running down the cheek, and she hadn't cried in months. On September 5th, she received a package. No return address. Inside a small, portable mirror. Its surface perfectly polished, cold to the touch. Taped to the back was a note. This one remembers. You needed to watch the others. It was her handwriting. But she hadn't written it. She tested the mirror immediately. Placed it beside her front door. Kept it facing outward. Never toward herself. She walked past it each day, watching it for change, waiting for it to do something. It didn't. Until the morning of the 7th. She'd made coffee, stepped outside to grab the paper, came back in. The mirror had turned, just a few degrees, now angled toward her desk. She checked for drafts, vibration, anything that could have nudged it. There was nothing. And then, lying neatly in the center of the desk, a VHS tape. Her hands went cold before she touched it. No label, no dust. Just a strip of masking tape along the bottom that read rehearsal. She didn't remember owning a VCR, but when she checked the bottom of her closet, there it was. Old, dusty. Still plugged into a surge protector that had long since died. She didn't remember putting it there. Didn't remember the closet having that second shelf before. But it did now. She played the tape. The footage was grainy. A living room. Familiar. Her living room. Same curtains. Same chipped coffee table. Only it wasn't today. In the frame, a girl, 8 years old, maybe 9, danced in a slow circle in the middle of the room, barefoot, hair tangled. Humming the rhyme, cut the face and stitch it down, Lena's breath hitched, because the girl was her. But not from memory, from something else, from something inserted. She had no recollection of this moment, no childhood tapes of it. And yet there she was, spinning, smiling, and stopping in front of the camera to whisper something. The first time you saw her wasn't in the mirror. She winked. Then static. Lena ripped the tape from the player and smashed it against the wall, but the sound it made wasn't plastic breaking. It was laughter. Childlike, giggling, faint, from the mirror. When she turned toward it, the surface had gone cloudy, and words were etched into the fog from the inside. Act 7 begins soon. She left her apartment that night, drove without a plan, without a map, to nowhere in particular. But every road sign had changed. The names were familiar. The streets were real, but the destinations didn't exist. Black Hollow, Mirror Falls, Echo Creek. Places that had no record, no population, but signs as real as the highway. She realized then that the play didn't need a theater anymore. It had a world, and it was expanding. Lena turned the car around, drove back to Hollow Creek, and on the side of the road, standing barefoot in the dust, was a girl in a white dress. No blood, no missing eyes, no sewn lips, just calm. Watching, she raised her hand and pointed up, to the sky, where no stars were. And on Lena's windshield, in the condensation from her breath, a new message appeared: you were never the audience. You were the understudy. And in the rearview mirror, Lena watched herself smile, without meaning to. She tried not to blink anymore. It had become a ritual, almost superstitious. She believed, no, she knew, that every time she blinked, something was waiting just behind her eyelids. Not darkness, not silence, something worse. A room, a girl, a mirror, a scene already rehearsed 1,000 times, waiting for her cue. Lena Harmon was no longer certain when her life had stopped being lived and started being performed. She had become an actor in her own skin, and she was starting to feel the lines blur. At the Hollow Creek precinct, no one remembered the case. Not one officer recalled the names Jimmy Wade or Ava Mercer. The chalkboard in the evidence room, once filled with tacks and strings and timelines, had been wiped clean and replaced with a birthday banner for Officer Reyes. Streamers, cake crumbs, lauder. They smiled when Lena asked about the missing kids. Even Reyes himself, mouth full of frosting, looked at her like she was speaking a different language. What kids? Then smiled. That same wrong smile. Lena nodded and left the party. She couldn't afford to be seen asking questions anymore. Not when every mirror in the building had been replaced with polished steel. And not when her own reflection had begun watching her first. She kept to herself now, kept her apartment dark, covered every reflective surface with fabric, duct tape, or pages torn from old case files. But it didn't help. She could feel them still. The rehearsals, the girl in white, the faceless cast that moved in perfect silence just beyond the walls. And then came the lines. She started finding them on scraps of paper in her pockets, in her glove compartment, scrawled across her own wrists in Sharpie she didn't remember writing. Lines like, "The curtain never falls until the audience stops watching," or "They loved her most when she didn't speak," or "Your last breath will be off script." She threw them away. But they came back, sometimes rewritten, sometimes longer, sometimes not in her handwriting. On the morning of September 9th, she found a man waiting on her porch. Not a stranger, not someone unfamiliar. Agent Monroe, one of the field specialists from the FBI who had handled the first wave of disappearances. Except Monroe had died 6 weeks ago. Lena had seen the body, had read the autopsy. He'd shot himself in the head in a motel 2 counties over, blood soaking the carpet like ink on blotter paper. And yet here he stood, smiling. "You missed rehearsal," he said. Lena didn't move. "You're dead." He nodded once. And yet, the show must go on. She reached for her weapon. He didn't flinch. "You can shoot me," he said. "It won't stop anything. That's not how this ends." "What do you want?" He turned his head slightly. Behind him, reflected in the glass door, Lena saw not his face, but hers. Crying, mouth sewn, eyes open. He leaned closer. "She doesn't want your death, Lena. She wants your performance." Then he walked away, and vanished before he hit the sidewalk. She didn't report it. Who would listen? Who could? The town was no longer full of witnesses. It was full of audiences who didn't know they were in seats. People who had rehearsed their lines so well, they'd forgotten there was a script at all. And Lena, she wasn't even sure she was off book anymore. She dreamed of mirrors now, not looking into them, but emerging from them. Each time the same dream, a long hallway lined with frames. In each one, a version of herself at a different age. 7 years old, dirt on her face. 16, crying in the locker room. 28, badge in her hand, pride in her chest. 37, gun pointed at Jimmy Wade's forehead. None of them moved, until she reached the last mirror. The girl in white waited there, hands pressed to the glass, mouth sewn, eyes bleeding, but smiling and whispering. Lena never heard the words in the dream, but she felt them. In her bones, in her stomach, in the teeth she sometimes dreamed of pulling out by the root. Then came the stage directions. They weren't notes anymore. They were commands. Written in red ink, always in courier font, always under her door each morning. INT. Lenis Bidar Om in IGHT. Lene sits on the edge of the bed. She doesn't speak. She watches the window. She doesn't cry. Or INT. Halanosrarkstad Ion Dere. Lena walks past the mirror. She doesn't flinch. She smiles. Just like she practiced. It was like someone, or something, had taken over the narrative, was scripting her life like a play. And the worst part, she couldn't disobey. The one time she did, when she didn't smile as written, she found her own photograph taped to her steering wheel later that day. Her face, mid-scream, her mouth torn wide, her eyes missing. On the back, out of character, Lena began to wonder if Jimmy had ever been the writer at all. What if he had only been the first actor? What if the real playwright had no face, only hands? What if the mirror had never been a portal or a prison, but a stage, a window into a script written not in blood or ink, but belief? She started writing notes to herself, not to survive, but to stay herself. Scrawled on her bathroom wall, "This isn't your line." On her hand, "Don't smile if you don't feel it." On her ceiling, "She hasn't learned pain. Show her." But every time she wrote something, another line would appear hours later, beneath hers, in smaller handwriting, like someone was annotating the script, responding. Editing. We already wrote the ending. Don't improvise. Remember who's watching. On September 13th, the town gathered. Every family, every child, all on Main Street. No announcement, no invitations. Just everyone there, standing silently. Lena watched from her window, breath caught in her throat, as hundreds of heads slowly turned toward her apartment, one by one. And then, together, they raised their hands, pointed at her, smiling, waiting. She understood then. They weren't just the audience anymore. They were the cast. She was the understudy, yes, but she had just received her final cue. And somewhere, deep within the mirror, lined hallways of whatever she was, the director waited, smiling, ready to bring down the house. And Lena. She was walking toward the stage. She could no longer tell when she was awake. Sleep had become a shallow performance, and dreams bled through the walls like mold. Lena Harmon couldn't remember the last time she'd felt real hunger, or fear, or anger that didn't feel written. Emotions passed through her now like rehearsed lines. Precise, timed, always in the right order. And lately, when she spoke, the words tasted like someone else's. The mirror in her kitchen had stayed covered for 12 days. She hadn't touched it, but hadn't looked at it. But that morning, the sheet was gone. No broken glass, no signs of intrusion. Just an uncovered mirror with fog on the surface, like someone had exhaled against it from the inside. And in the condensation, the words "dress rehearsal today." Final call. Lena left the apartment before the sun rose. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take her badge. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not because she was hiding, but because she didn't need to. They already knew. The streets were empty, but not quiet. There was a hum beneath the silence, like distant electricity or the blood rush echo that fills the ears before a blackout. The light poles flickered in perfect sync. Leaves on the trees didn't sway. They shivered, like they knew what was coming. Lena turned onto Sycamore Lane. Every house had its curtains open, and every window had a mirror facing outward. She saw herself reflected again and again, multiplied down the block, her body staggering toward an unknown stage like a sleepwalker heading toward a ledge. And in each reflection, she was smiling. The location came to her not as a thought, but as a cue. The old Carmichael Auditorium, condemned 10 years ago. Fire damage, they said. Roof collapse. But Lena remembered it from childhood. The hardwood stage, the velvet seats, the smell of sweat and makeup and dust in the wings. And now, she remembered something else. Not a show she saw there, but a mirror in the green room. A full-length dressing mirror that always seemed too cold, too tall, too alive. She had looked into it once as a child and had sworn, for years afterward, that her reflection had blinked after she turned away. When she arrived, the doors were already open. The wood groaned under her boots as she stepped inside. There were no lights, but the stage was lit. Spotlights beamed down from rafters that shouldn't have had power. In the audience seats mannequins. Hundreds of them, dressed in torn clothes, faces covered in plaster, mouths painted in wide, stiff smiles. Each one held a mirror in their lap, all angled toward the stage, toward her. She stepped into the light, and the mirror was waiting, tall, framed in gold, cracked from top to bottom, but holding, like a wound stitched just tight enough to keep from bleeding. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She waited for her line. And then, from behind her, a voice began. She turned. A girl in white stood behind her. Not Ava, not Rachel, not any one face, all of them. Every missing child folded into one smooth, porcelain figure, her mouth still sewn, her eyes so wide they shimmered. And behind her, Jimmy Wade. Still frozen, still alive, held in a standing position by something invisible, strings twitching from his wrists and ankles, like a puppet waiting for someone to cut him free or let him dance. He didn't speak, he couldn't. But his eyes screamed. The girl stepped forward, raised her hand, pointed to the mirror, and Lena understood her line. It was always the same. Look. She stepped forward. Closer, closer. until her reflection stared back, smiling. But not now Lena. It was her from another life. Hair longer, uniform clean, badge shining, hope still in her eyes. The version of her before all this. And she was mouthing something, over and over. Lena leaned in, read her lips. Don't let her wear you. But it was too late. The mirror rippled. Her reflection reached forward, pressed a hand against the glass, and for the first time, Lena felt it back. Skin, warm, real. Her own hand pressed against hers, but not quite aligned. The bones slightly wrong, the palm a second too slow. Her reflection wasn't copying her, it was leading. Behind her, the mannequins stood, all of them, together. They raised their mirrors to eye level. Reflections multiplied, reflections repeated, and in every one, Lena's face was changing. The mouth stitched, the eyes bleeding, the smile growing, until the real Lena, the only Lena, felt her mouth twitch upward. Not because she wanted to, because the script said so. The girl in white stepped beside her. Together, they turned toward the audience. A chorus of whispers rose from behind the plaster mouths. We see you, we see you, we see you. Over and over. A chant, a promise, a closing line. The mirror split, not shattered. Opened. The glass folded inward like liquid, revealing a hallway behind it. Endless. Lit by 100 flickering lights. And on the walls, frames, mirrors. Every version of Lena's life hung in pieces. Every moment, every choice. But all of them stopped at the same place, the theater, the stage. This moment, where her story ended and someone else's began. The girl took her hand, led her toward the mirror. Lena didn't fight, not because she had no strength, but because the truth had finally reached her. She had never been the detective. She had never been the hero. She was the understudy, prepared to take the stage the second the original actor failed. And Jimmy Wade, he was just the one who missed his cue. As Lena crossed the threshold, the mannequins bowed. The lights dimmed, and behind her the girl whispered, "Now, let's see how well you remember your lines." The mirror closed, the curtain fell, and the real world kept on smiling. The town did not mourn her. There were no missing posters for Detective Lena Harmon, no candlelight vigils, no frantic search parties combing the woods with dogs and flashlights. The local paper ran a story on page 7, local woman resigns from police force. 2 sentences, no photo, no quote, no questions. Just like that, she was gone. And yet every window in Hollow Creek began to show her face. Not outside, inside. Reflected in the glass for only a second. Too quick to prove, but long enough to feel. In bathrooms, car mirrors, coffee machines, phone screens left on standby. A blink too long, and there she was, her face pale, eyes wide, mouth stitched tight, always watching. But the townspeople didn't seem to notice. They just kept smiling. Because the show was still going. And none of them wanted to miss their cue. The auditorium remained sealed to the public. The official story was that it had collapsed after a windstorm, condemned fully and boarded by order of the state. But that was a lie, one too neat, too rehearsed. The reality was far more unsettling. The building was changing. Slowly, quietly, without tools, without workers. Its exterior grew colder each night, the bricks darkening to an unnatural gray, the windows vanishing one by one as if swallowed by the structure itself. And once a week, without fail, the lights came on inside. No one walked in, no one walked out, but the stage lit up at 2:00 a.m., and shadows danced behind the curtains. Not people. Figures, elongated, crooked, marionette-like. Those who lived near the building started hearing sounds during those hours: applause, footsteps, the faint whimper of children, and always the humming. The same melody, again and again. See no evil, hear no sound, cut the face and stitch it down. In the depths of the mirror hall, Lena was no longer certain who she was. Time didn't pass here. It performed. Each second looped and edited, spliced with memories that weren't hers. She walked corridors where every surface was reflective, yet none showed her true face. Sometimes she saw herself as a child, sometimes as a corpse, and sometimes not as anyone at all, just costume. A shell of flesh stitched into a shape the audience would recognize. That's what she had become. Not the hero. Not the detective. Not even the understudy anymore. The role had changed. She was the mask now. The one they would wear when it was time. She began hearing the director, not in voice, in notes, pages slid under doors that had no hinges. Instructions always typed, always in courier new, as if the script itself was being written one scene ahead of her. INT, Mar or hell L Edarnel IGHT Lanana walks slowly. She does not question. She does not speak. She observes. And then Ciutio INT, Betty Aromahiel no he Eki Simanianos Amotadr brushes her daughter's hair. The mirror shows two girls. Neither of them the daughter. She read them. Obeyed them. Because she had learned what happened when she didn't. The one time she had refused to cue, just once, she had lost an entire day. Woke up somewhere else, bleeding from the gums, mouth full of hair. No memory of what happened. Only the message scrawled in lipstick on the inside of her eyelids. No improvisation. Back in the real world, if it could still be called that, children began humming in their sleep. Not just one. Hundreds. Parents dismissed it as a phase. Nightmares. Viral videos. Nothing to worry about. But the children all hummed the same thing. Same tune. Same words. Same flat effect. Psychologists were baffled. Priests whispered about demonic influence. But nothing stuck, because none of them had seen the stage. None of them knew the play was already halfway through. Only one person in Hollow Creek remembered what had been real Marion Green. She had been Rachel Klein's teacher. A substitute who once found the child's sketchbook and handed it in to Lena before the girl vanished. She remembered the pages, the crude figures, the mirror symbols, the eyes crossed out. She remembered Lena's face the day she saw them, haunted, frantic sure. Now, Marion watched the town slide into performance. She watched the way people laughed a second too late, how conversations repeated like lines on loop, and how every morning at 3:33 a.m., the lights in her bathroom turned on by themselves. The mirror faced her bed. She smashed it. The next day, it was whole again. Cleaner than before, and written in fog, everyone has their part. Lena continued walking the hall of mirrors. She saw lives she'd never lived. Watched versions of herself give birth, commit murder, burn houses to the ground. She watched herself marry Jimmy Wade in one frame and slit his throat in another. In each version, she smiled. And in each one, behind her, the girl in white stood silently, hands folded, watching the scene unfold like a proud playwright. One mirror showed Lena standing on the auditorium stage, curtains closed, arms wide, audience on their feet. She was taking a bow. They were clapping. But no sound came, because they had no mouths. One day, if it was a day, she reached a room with no mirrors at all. Just a chair and a dressing table. On it, a single item, a mask, plain white. Mouth stitched shut with red thread. Inside it, a note, final performance begins when you stop asking why. She didn't need to read it twice. She picked up the mask. It fit perfectly, like it had been molded for her. And the moment she put it on, the stage lights blinked on. Not in the mirror world. In Hollow Creek, people gathered again, as if summoned. Main Street, Town Hall, the school. They didn't know why they were there. Didn't speak. Just stood, all of them smiling. Every mirror in town fogged at once. Every reflection disappeared, and then returned, showing only one face. The stitched mask, Lena's eyes behind it, the girl's smile through it. The final act had begun, and this time, the audience wasn't watching. They were performing. They didn't know when the lines started appearing in their pockets. At first, it was just paper. Slips tucked inside coat linings, or folded neatly between pages of forgotten books. Grocery store receipts rewritten as dialogue. Library cards etched with stage directions. A town-wide hallucination, except no one called it that, because no one wanted to admit it was happening. They laughed it off. They always laughed, because they were supposed to. And every time someone said, Strange, huh? Or what are the odds? Or just one of those days, the smile that followed lasted a little too long. The laughter, just a little too flat. The pauses between replies, choreographed. By October, Hollow Creek was rehearsing without realizing it. Mayor Thompson's Sunday speech began to repeat, word for word, every week. He would stand on the town hall steps, wave his hands in the same direction, thank the same imaginary guests, and end with the same line, and remember, our reflection is who we really are. Even when asked about it, he'd blink like someone had unplugged a socket in his brain. Then smile. Have a beautiful day, Hollow Creek. It didn't matter what the question was. That's all he ever said now. In school, the children stopped raising their hands. They moved in sync, heads turning together, pencils tapping together, eyes drifting toward windows at the exact same time. When the teacher asked a question, every mouth answered at once. Same voice, same cadence, same smile. But none of the teachers left. Not one. Even the ones who knew something was wrong, especially the ones who knew. They were no longer educating. They were blocking scenes. Marion Green tried to leave. She packed a bag, drove to the edge of town, radio humming static. But when she passed the Hollow Creek city limits, she blinked and woke up in her own bathtub, fully dressed, the water cold. A note pinned to her shirt. You missed your entrance. After that, she stopped trying. She just stayed in her living room, door locked. Every mirror turned to the wall. She spoke out loud once an hour, not to anyone, just to hear her voice echo back unchanged. If it came back wrong, she'd know. If it didn't come back at all, she'd end it. Across town, on her old desk at the precinct, Lena's badge returned. No one knew how. It hadn't been seen since she vanished, and yet there it was. Shined, polished, centered. Lieutenant Mark Walters picked it up, turned it over, and on the back, where her serial number should have been, something new had been etched. She's still watching. He laughed, set it back down, never mentioned it again. The next morning, Walters came into work smiling, teeth too white, voice too rehearsed, eyes just a bit slower. He was still Mark, everyone said, just better, more agreeable, less tired. No one questioned it. They were told not to. And who told them? That was the terrifying part. No one could remember. Only that they'd been instructed. In the mirror world, or whatever lived beneath it, Lena's mask had become her face. She could no longer tell where it ended and her skin began. It no longer itched. It no longer moved. But she could see through it. Not just the physical world, them, the people, their lines, their cues. Their quiet rehearsal marks, etched into sidewalks and alleyways, invisible to the eye, but glowing for those who'd worn the mask. She could read their parts before they spoke, could predict every gesture, every breath. They were perfect, so well trained, so afraid of improvising. And above all, they were loyal, not to her, to the director, who never showed his face, but whose hands were everywhere. She saw him once. Only a shadow, tall, thin, his head tilted, as if always listening for laughter that might never come. He stood behind the curtain of the largest mirror in the hall, didn't speak, didn't move, but his fingers twitched, jerky, like a puppeteer with 1,000 strings tied to every soul above. Lena tried to scream, but the mask didn't allow it. It only smiled, always smiled, even when her eyes bled behind it. She began to wonder if Jimmy Wade had escaped, if his frozen fate, arms suspended, mouth wide, wasn't punishment, but mercy. A pause in a story too horrible to finish. She passed him often now, still standing, still silent. But lately his eyes had changed. They flicked ever so slightly when she passed, watched her, pleading maybe, or worse, rehearsing. One day, the mannequins began to vanish from the auditorium. No more painted smiles, no more cracked plastic hands. Instead, the seats were filled with townspeople, smiling, clapping, not speaking, and in the center of the stage, her, Lena, not in flesh, in mirrors. Hundreds of her reflections dancing, repeating old cases, retracing memories she didn't recognize anymore. Each one performing a different version of herself, all choreographed, all polished, like different drafts of the same character. The audience watched without blinking, and slowly, the play changed. It wasn't about Jimmy anymore. It wasn't about Ava, or Rachel, or the missing. It was about Lena, a story rewritten from the beginning. The detective who saw too much, who went off script, who had to be corrected. And the final act was coming. The last line had already been written. She saw it etched into the largest mirror. A sentence so final it made her knees buckle. When the audience becomes the mask becomes real. She didn't understand it at first, until she looked into the mirror and saw not herself, but Marion Green, wearing the mask, and behind her another town, another stage, another show just beginning. It was never about saving Hollow Creek. It was about scaling. This wasn't the end. It was just opening night. By the time Halloween arrived in Hollow Creek, no one remembered what the holiday was for. The decorations still appeared, paper skeletons in windows, flickering jack-o' lanterns on porches, but the meaning behind them was gone. The children didn't trick or treat. The parents didn't host parties. No one dressed up. No one had to. Because every face in town already wore a mask. They just didn't know it. Not anymore. Inside the old Carmichael Auditorium, the mirrors had begun to grow, not in size, but in reach. The walls no longer ended where they should. Lena wandered for hours, possibly days, without seeing the same hallway twice. Every corridor was lined with her, though never the same her twice. One version sobbed silently in a chair, blood dripping from her ears. Another screamed with a face so contorted it looked like melting wax. Some were older. Some wore child-sized clothes. Some didn't have eyes. But all of them watched her walk past. And every one of them mouthed the same thing as she passed. I remember now. She tried to stop looking into them. But the mirrors were no longer passive. They pulled her gaze. A single glance became a gravity that refused to release. And when she stared too long, she would wake up somewhere else. In one mirror, she touched the surface and opened her eyes in a child's bedroom. Toys scattered across the floor. The ceiling fan spinning too fast. A teddy bear with a stitched mouth in the corner. She was wearing a different body, a child's again. She screamed, but no sound came. Outside the window, figures danced in the street, holding hands in a circle, humming the rhyme that had followed her through the years. Then she blinked. Back in the hallway, her hands trembling, skin burning, mask cracked just slightly at the edge. The director never spoke. He didn't have to. His silence was a language louder than any voice. When Lena walked into the auditorium for the 100th time, maybe the 1000th, she saw him again. A silhouette seated in the very last row. Nothing visible but long legs, arms folded, and the glint of a pocket watch swaying gently in his hand. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The rhythm was nauseating, too slow to match any real time, too fast to ignore. And as the ticking echoed through the hall, the mirrors began to sync with it. Every time the watch clicked, Lena's reflections jerked forward, just slightly, like puppets reacting to a cue. She had become two things now, the character and the set. In Hollow Creek, people stopped dreaming, or maybe their dreams were stolen. Marion Green hadn't slept in 4 days, not without waking up somewhere else. Not in her bed. Not in her house. Once, she woke up sitting in a theater seat, clapping with hands that weren't hers. Another time, she opened her eyes and found herself behind her own classroom desk, surrounded by children whose eyes were perfectly black. She tried once more to escape. This time she burned everything. Her car, her clothes, her house. But when the fire was out and the sun returned, it was all still there, unburned, unchanged, waiting, and her mailbox held a new note. This isn't improv, Marion. You're still on book. The children had stopped speaking entirely. In school, they moved like dancers. They hummed. They tilted their heads at the same angle. They blinked together, and worst of all, they watched the mirrors. Every time they passed one, they paused, as if waiting for instructions, as if listening for their next line. And sometimes, Marion swore she saw their reflections moving after they did, like understudies in the wings, preparing to take over. Lena's world began to bleed into theirs. Cracks appeared on town windows, hairline fractures that spread across glass like veins. Reflections wobbled unnaturally. People would pause mid-conversation to adjust an imaginary earpiece, or respond to unheard voices with lines that didn't make sense, scenes not ready yet. She's still in makeup. I don't have the new script. Then they'd blink, smile, and continue like nothing happened. Inside the mirror world, Lena no longer walked. She was moved, guided by unseen hands through hallways, across black stages, into scenes recreated from her life. She saw her mother's death replayed in a kitchen that smelled too clean. She saw herself testifying in court, but the judge had no face. The jury wore her own eyes. Jimmy Wade sat in the defendant's chair, smiling, his stitched lips pulsing like a heartbeat. Then the lights would flicker, scene change, next trauma, next cue. The mask she wore was now part of her skull. She could feel it growing into her, fiber by fiber, not painful, worse, comfortable, like it belonged there, like it always had. And when she looked into the mirror now, she saw not her own reflection, but someone else's watching her. An audience of Lena-faced children, smiling politely, clapping at every blink. And then, for the first time since she crossed over, she heard a line she didn't recognize. A voice unfamiliar, rough, fractured. From behind one of the mirrors, we never agreed to this. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Jimmy's. It wasn't the director's. It was another. And it repeated, louder, we never agreed to this. Then came the sound of shattering, a mirror. Breaking from the inside, the hallway flickered. The lights trembled, and for the first time, the script glitched. The scene reset 3 times in under a minute. Lena watched her surroundings stutter and repeat like a skipping record. Dialogue replayed, walls rearranged, props resetting themselves. Something was wrong. The world, the play, was off cue. And that meant only one thing: someone else was interfering. Someone inside, not part of the script, not cast, not crew. Someone awake. She ran, or maybe her body ran for her. But either way, she pushed through a collapsing mirror at the end of the corridor and fell face first into a classroom. The real world. Hollow Creek Elementary, desk dusty, lights flickering. The air thick with rot and silence. At the front of the room, standing in front of a chalkboard, was Marion Green, eyes wide, blood on her palms. Behind her a mirror, cracked down the middle. She looked up and whispered, I found the prop closet. They weren't props, they were replacements. Lena's mask smiled. Marion screamed. And from the hallway the sound of clapping began. Slow, rising, in perfect, rehearsed, terrifying unison. The audience had arrived early, and they were hungry for an encore. Marion didn't stop screaming, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to forget what fear sounded like. In Hollow Creek, fear had become rare, precious even. Most people had traded it for smiles and stage cues. But not her. Not yet. She'd broken the glass, broken the rules, and now she stood in front of Lena Harmon, or something wearing her face, not knowing if she had saved someone or let something loose. Lena didn't move. The mask had become part of her flesh, stitched to the bone with dark threads that pulsed like veins. But behind the holes where her eyes should have been, Marion saw something alive, not human, not familiar, watching, not blinking. And then Lena, or the thing inside Lena, tilted her head slightly, as if hearing something distant, a music cue maybe, or an applause sign lighting up in a place no one else could see. I thought you were gone, Marion whispered. Lena's mask didn't reply, but her reflection in the broken classroom mirror did. It smiled wider, and mouthed something that wasn't part of the scene. It's not about one show. It's a franchise. That night, everyone in Hollow Creek received a flyer under their doors, black and white, unmarked, no postage. The headline read, "No W's Castaigo Pun Ralas Far The Next Proud UCI," and below it, a list of character names, not fictional ones, real ones. People in the town. Names of friends, teachers, former students, dead relatives. Each name had a checkbox next to it. At the bottom, in bold font, replacements will be prepared. Do not worry about memorizing lines. You already know them. Most people didn't remember reading it the next morning, but they began acting differently. More precise, more on beat, even when speaking nonsense. Their timing was impeccable. They were no longer people. They were roles in motion. At the precinct, Officer Quinn shot himself in the locker room. 3 bullets. Close range, no hesitation. Except, there was no blood. His body slumped, eyes open, mouth twitching with a confused smile. And when EMTs arrived, his badge had already been cleaned and reset on the desk with a new nameplate. Officer Quinn returned to work the next morning. Perfectly fine. No one questioned it. No one remembered he'd ever left. Because the replacement had taken. Marion stopped going home. She started living in the abandoned school building, sleeping with a baseball bat under her arms and chalk circles around the desk. Every night, she whispered names she wanted to remember. Her parents, her real students. Rachel, of Alina, not this Lena. The before Lena. She didn't know if she believed in prayer, but she treated her whispers like spells. Like a way to hold back the curtain just a little longer. But it was closing, faster every day. In the mirror world, Lena began seeing others. Not reflections. People, walking the halls in silence. Some were mannequins in transition. Bodies covered in fabric, stitching still fresh, joints not yet bending the right way. Others were copies. Carbon sketches of people she once knew, repeating lines from old conversations on loop. Did you see the weather today? Hard to beat a deal like that. I'm just here to watch the show. One girl, no older than 10, walked barefoot through the corridor humming the rhyme, "Hear no evil. See no sound. They wear your face when you're not around." She turned to Lena and said, "We can't all be leads." Then she folded backward, joints snapping like sticks, and vanished through the glass. Lena no longer tried to escape. She was the mask now, and the mask had a job, to teach the new ones, to prepare them, the replacements. Each time a real soul cracked, either by madness, violence, or disbelief, the director would write a new scene. The mirror world would birth a copy. The show would continue, and Lena was the one who walked them through their roles, step by step, gesture by gesture. She didn't know if she hated herself more for obeying, or for starting to enjoy it. There was a power in obedience, a relief in precision. She didn't have to think, only perform, but deep down something still remembered. A tiny stitch had come loose inside her skull, a thought that shouldn't have survived the rewrite, a name, Marion. She whispered it to herself in the hallway, and something behind the mirror twitched. Back in the real world, Marion found a room in the school basement, one that hadn't existed before. She walked through a broken locker and found herself in a dark, cold space with dozens of folded costumes hanging on racks. School uniforms, police gear, casual clothes, all labeled with names, names of people who were still alive, and at the back, 7 mirrors, covered in sheets. One by one, she pulled them down. Each revealed a frozen face. Rachel, Ava, Detective Harmon, Jimmy Wade, Officer Quinn, her own face, and one more, a child she didn't recognize. Mouth wide, eyes hollow, hands pressed against the glass from the inside, scraping, waiting. She ran, but not out of the building, back upstairs, to the only working intercom left in the school. And for the first time in days, she broadcast to the town. "I know you're listening," she said, "and if you are, please, check your mirrors. They're not showing your reflection anymore. They're showing your replacement." At 3:33 a.m., every light in town went out. For 12 seconds, Hollow Creek vanished into complete darkness. When the lights came back on, 27 people had disappeared, their beds still warm, their clothes folded neatly at the foot of their mattresses. All of their mirrors were clean, too clean, scrubbed like a stage reset between scenes. Lena stood backstage, watching the empty auditorium fill with shadows. The director stood beside her. He handed her a script. There were no more lines, only this final blackout. Lena looked at him, then at the stage, then at the audience, all of them wearing her face, all of them clapping. She lifted her hand. The curtain rose, and somewhere far away, Marion Green's mirror cracked down the middle. It was just a sound at first, something low, almost inaudible, like the thrum of power lines deep underground. Not music, not speech, but presence. It buzzed in the walls of Hollow Creek, vibrating the old wood frames of houses, flickering through television static, humming inside every mirror-silvered skin. The moment Lena raised her hand in the dark auditorium, the sound grew, gently at first, then like a scream underwater. And just before the curtain fully opened, every resident in town blinked in unison. No one spoke of it, because no one remembered doing it, except Marion Green. She didn't blink. She didn't even breathe. She just stared into the fractured mirror in the corner of her hideout classroom and waited. Waited to see if her reflection would blink first. It didn't. It smiled. The curtain rose not on a stage, but on a copy of Hollow Creek. A perfect reconstruction. Every house, every tree, every traffic light stuck permanently on yellow. It was all there, built inside a theater space that should have been too small to contain it. But logic had died a long time ago. Here, space didn't matter. Time didn't matter. Only direction. The audience, now thousands strong, sat without moving, each face pale, clean, untouched by thought. They weren't watching a play. They were watching themselves. Each actor on stage was a clone, a replacement, walking through scenes with empty eyes and scripted lives. Lena stood off stage, masked, watching from the wings. The director leaned over and whispered his first, and only words, "We've never had a cast this devoted." She didn't answer, but inside her, a thought began to rise, a voice, her own, not spoken aloud, just there. "You still remember who you are." The rehearsal was perfect, too perfect. The replacements glided through their day to day roles in a clockwork fashion, a mother tying her son's shoes while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, a mailman delivering the same letter to the same house over and over again, Officer Quinn tipping his hat to invisible townsfolk on a loop. Every 15 minutes, the lights would dim slightly, a subtle cue, and every time it happened, the scene would reset. Characters would rewind, start again, as if perfection was just one take away, and again, until no one remembered how long it had been since the show began. But something began to crack. A child on stage, 10, maybe 11 years old, stopped mid-sentence during a breakfast scene. She dropped her spoon, turned her head to the mirror hanging on the prop kitchen wall, and whispered, "That's not me." The lights above her snapped. The stage flickered. The audience didn't react. The director stood, clapped once, and she was gone. Just gone, in her place a copy. The same girl, same clothes, same smile. Only this one didn't drop her spoon, didn't question. She finished her cereal. The scene moved on. Marion hadn't left the school since the broadcast. She knew the town wasn't real anymore. At least, not in the way it used to be. What she saw outside was a set, the sunlight too sterile. The birdsong looped, neighbors walking with the exact same gait, like background extras programmed to exist, but not to feel. She'd written the names of the missing in her notebook, a list that now covered 3 full pages. But something strange had begun. Names were repeating. People who had vanished were disappearing again. Copies of copies. Scenes rewritten over themselves like tapes recorded one too many times. And with every rewrite, something bled through. A corruption. Glitches in the faces. Hands trembling for no reason. People pausing mid-sentence and forgetting who they were supposed to be. like the director's grip was slipping, and the play was starting to tear at the seams. One night, Marion returned to the basement mirror room. All the sheets were gone, every mirror exposed. But now, instead of faces inside them, they were empty. Just sets, rooms, chairs. The places where the next replacements would go. Ready for actors who didn't know they were in rehearsal. And beside the seventh mirror, the one she hadn't been able to identify before, was a note. It was written in red marker. In her own handwriting, "They're rehearsing your part now." She stumbled back, ran upstairs, and found her classroom door wide open. On the chalkboard, lines written in chalk she never touched. Ms. Green enters stage right. Looks confused. Speaks her truth. Audience reacts with silence. Cue blackout. She erased it with shaking hands. But the chalk wrote itself again. And this time, it added something new: do not improvise. Improvisation kills the flow. Lena began seeing her own mirror self resist. One day in rehearsal, she looked up and saw her reflection shaking its head slowly, side to side. No, she stepped forward, touched the glass. Her mask smiled, but her reflection didn't. It stayed still, blank-faced. Then it cracked, not the mirror, the image. As if something inside the reflection had fractured, like a film reel catching fire in the projector. The director snapped his fingers. Lights out. Scene reset. But Lena remembered. This time she remembered. The replacements were breaking, and they knew it. One of the extras whispered to her between scenes. He wore Jimmy Wade's face, but Lena knew it wasn't him. Still, the voice was human. "I don't know how long I've been here," he said, "but I think I had a name once." She reached for him, but he turned away. "Don't touch me. If he sees us, he'll write a new ending." Lena backed off, and for the first time, she realized even the replacements wanted out. The finale was scheduled. The script had been written. A perfect end to a perfect performance. Every citizen of Hollow Creek would take the stage, all of them in sync, all of them clapping, and then silence, lights down. Total black, the director would bow, and the real Hollow Creek erased, buried beneath mirrors and lines. A permanent set, waiting for the next town to rehearse. But one thing remained unwritten: Marion. She wasn't in the script. She wasn't on the stage. She wasn't in the director's records. She was off book, untrackable, a wild card. And she had one thing no one else had any more: free will. And just before the final blackout, she stood in front of the school intercom one last time, her voice hoarse, her eyes sunken, but still hers. "If you can hear me," she said, "and you know you're not yourself, break your mirror." That night, across Hollow Creek, 32 mirrors shattered at once, and the stage lights began to flicker. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Hollow Creek stopped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but like a scratched record losing its rhythm. The town fell out of sync. Lawn sprinklers misfired in silence. The school bell rang 4 minutes late. People still smiled, but their eyes hesitated a second longer before doing so. No one mentioned it. No one could. Because the lines hadn't been written for that. The mirror shards scattered across bedrooms and hallways were never swept up. They weren't just glass now, they were anchors. Pieces of whatever was left of the real world. Small, jagged truths. And with every fragment that broke, so did another replacement script. And some of them began to wake up. Marion Green no longer whispered her list of names. She screamed them now, each morning, over the school's intercom. Screamed them like prayers, like anchors, like the only things tying her to whatever thread of truth was still holding firm. She didn't know who was still listening, if anyone was, but every morning she screamed anyway.
Rachel Klein, Ava Donovan, Jimmy Wade, Lena Harmon, Quinn, Lila Marsh, Principal Hendricks, me.
The last name always came out broken, half sob, half declaration, because she didn't feel like herself anymore. Her thoughts ran in loops. Her dreams were filled with stage lights and curtain calls. And worst of all, she'd started repeating herself. She had found a page of her own handwriting on the floor that morning, Miss. Green enters stage right, looks confused, speaks her truth. She'd already erased that once, maybe twice, but it kept coming back. Lena stood in front of the main auditorium mirror, mask still sewn tight to her skin, but something beneath it moved. Not her mouth, her will. Like a pulse of electricity pushing outward, a part of her that remembered how to fight. She lifted a hand to the glass, and instead of mimicking her, the reflection blinked and said, "You were never cast. You were chosen." She stepped back, shaken. It was her voice, but she hadn't spoken. She hadn't said anything. The reflection touched the inside of the glass with its palm, and then, slowly, began unthreading the mask, stitch by stitch. Skin tearing as it pulled, bloodless but wrong in a way that made Lena's knees shake. When the final thread loosened, the reflection smiled. Not her smile, Rachel's. The real Rachel, eyes sharp, terrified, but alive somewhere inside the mirror, somewhere waiting. In the copy of Hollow Creek on the stage, glitches became unavoidable. A man repeated the same sentence at the gas station until his jaw dislocated. A woman stood motionless on her porch for hours, her coffee cup melting in her clenched hand. A dog barked with a baby's cry. And in the town square, all 4 clocks ticked in reverse. The director remained seated, silent, motionless. But his fingers now twitched constantly faster than before. Like a marionette running out of thread, like even he wasn't sure what was happening. Or maybe he was. And this was the script all along. Marion stepped out of the school for the first time in days. She carried nothing but a hammer in one hand and the cracked mirror shard she had saved in the other. The sky over Hollow Creek was wrong. Too still, too flat, like a painted backdrop that might tear if she shouted loud enough. But she didn't shout this time. She walked. Slowly, past empty yards and frozen people holding frozen poses. They didn't move, didn't breathe, until she passed the barber shop, and the man in the chair turned his head 180 degrees and whispered, "You're behind on your cue." She kept walking. Didn't stop. Couldn't afford to. Back in the mirror world, Lena found the door. Not a real one, just an archway where the hallway ended and a pale white light spilled through. It smelled like bleach and burnt hair. She stepped through and into a vast black soundstage. Set pieces of her life surrounded her. Her old apartment, the precinct, the diner where she used to meet Jimmy, all built like cardboard cutouts. One good push and they'd fall over, and in the center, an operating table. Rachel was on it, eyes open, not blinking, not screaming, just watching. Beside her, tools, scissors, thread, and a script, freshly typed. Page 1 open with blood, begin again. Lena moved slowly toward the table. Rachel's eyes didn't follow her, but her lips parted, just barely, and she mouthed, "They can't write what they can't understand." Lena touched her hand. It was warm, real, not a prop, and in that moment she felt the mirror around her world flex. The set groaned, the air warped. The story had been too clean, too precise, too safe. Now it was breaking, because uncertainty had been introduced, and the director hated uncertainty. At that same moment, across town, Marion reached the auditorium. Doors wide open, lights off, stage silent. She walked through the lobby, every step echoing louder than it should. Posters on the wall changed when she passed them. Old school plays replaced with photos of the missing. Rachel, Ava, Lena, herself. One frame was still blank, waiting. At the bottom, in handwritten scrawl cast last, she walked to the stage. Lena stood there now, no mask, bleeding, but awake. And in her arms Rachel, still breathing, still whole. Marion's hammer slipped from her grip. The director rose from his seat in the crowd, clapping, not slowly, not mockingly, but furiously with shaking hands, like he was furious they'd gotten this far, like he knew the next line and hated it. He opened his mouth to speak, but there were no lines left to say, because someone, somewhere, had burned the final page. And then the lights died, not dimmed, died. Every bulb burst, every filament hissed. The curtain caught fire, not with flames, but with darkness. A growing black that didn't eat light. It, erased shape, erased meaning. And from behind it, something stepped forward. Not the director, not Lena, not Rachel, the original, the thing that wrote the first script. Before people, before language, its face was blank, its hands were mirrors. And when it reached toward Marion, she did the only thing she could. She spoke. Off book, off script. No. And the mirrors screamed, every single one. Splintered into sound, shattered into echoes. And for a moment, a heartbeat. Hollow Creek became real again. The stage fell away. The lights vanished. The audience evaporated. And Lena stood blinking in the center of an empty auditorium. Rachel's hand in hers, Marion behind them. The smell of ozone and static in the air. No mirrors, no director, no masks. Only breath, real. And the echo of the final line that was never written, but lived. No. The sun rose over Hollow Creek for the first time in what felt like forever. Not that usual sterile glow painted on a backdrop, not the forced golden light that warmed nothing. It was sunlight. Real, sharp and unwelcome, slicing through fog like it had something to prove. For the first few hours, the town didn't move. No one spoke. No one opened their doors. They just waited. As if the sky might change its mind and fade back into cardboard. As if reality might peel off again, revealing stage lights behind the clouds. But it didn't. Something had changed. Something had stuck. Lena sat on the curb outside the auditorium, holding her arms around Rachel's shoulders. They hadn't spoken. There weren't words for it yet. The only sound was Rachel's steady breathing, too rhythmic to be broken, but still hers. Her eyes were wide open, watching the trees move in the wind like she was seeing them for the first time. Maybe she was. Everything had color again. Dirt looked like dirt. Leaves rustled in random, unscripted ways. The birds didn't chirp in loops anymore. They argued, squawked, warbled without melody. It was ugly. It was unpolished. It was alive. And Lena couldn't stop crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just slow tears that wouldn't stop. Because the mask was gone. The strings were cut. But her skin still remembered the tightness. And her mind wasn't whole. Inside the auditorium, the seats were empty. Not just vacated, never filled. The audience that had clapped for centuries was gone without a trace. No residue, no dropped programs, just dust and quiet. The stage was bare. The set had collapsed into splinters and ash. There were no more cues, no more lines, no lights. The director's chair lay on its side. And where he had once stood, there was now only a mirror, cracked top to bottom, covered in fingerprints, each one pressed with desperation, as if whoever had been inside hadn't been clapping. They'd been trapped. Marion found the journal, buried in the rubble of the school's basement, her own handwriting on the front. Only she had no memory of writing it. Page after page of stage directions, town maps, character bios, schedules, scene changes, and most disturbingly, rehearsal logs, entries tracking every moment of the townspeople's lives. Ava brushes hair, 6:03 a.m. Quinn checks mirror, 6:11 a.m. Lena looks out window, forgets dream, 6:15 a.m. It was dated 5 years back. 5 years of rehearsal. 5 years of being watched. Not just by him. By someone who wrote this. Someone who had access. Someone inside. At the bottom of the final page, a phrase was scrawled in bold. Jagged ink, final blackout was a lie. Reset is coming. The town started to wake up, little by little. People who had been stuck in scripts wandered out of their houses with blank eyes, blinking into the sun like newborns. They didn't speak at first. Their mouths would open, then close again, like they were waiting for a prompt that never came. But slowly, they began to try. Simple things. Is this real? Where's my husband? What day is it? Lena answered what she could. Marion lied when she had to. Rachel didn't speak at all. She just held Lena's hand like a child dragging her anchor through a hurricane. By nightfall, Hollow Creek had a heartbeat again. An uneven, painful one. But it was theirs. The streetlights flickered but stayed on. The sky didn't peel back. and no new script appeared. For the first time, no one knew what came next. It should have been a relief. But Marian felt it first, the cold slide of dread behind her eyes. The silence wasn't peace. It was the space between acts. That night, in the shattered auditorium, Lena dreamed. She stood backstage again, alone, no mask, just a black void beyond the curtain. She stepped forward and found herself surrounded by mirrors again. But they didn't show her this time. They showed others. Towns she didn't recognize. Different places. Different people. But all rehearsing. A woman repeating the same conversation at a gas station pump in Nebraska. A child spinning in circles in a supermarket aisle in Georgia. A preacher stuck mid-sermon in a ghost town church. In each scene, mirrors lined the walls. And behind those mirrors, the director watched. Still alive. Still clapping. Still casting. Lena awoke with a scream in her throat and a fire in her lungs. The war wasn't over. It had just moved on. She told Marian everything. Every mirror. Every face. Every other town rehearsing its own fall. Marian didn't ask how she knew. She just asked the only question that mattered. Is it coming here again? Lena nodded. Eventually. The director always returns for the final draft. And somewhere, on a night so quiet it hurt, a child drew a smiley face on a fogged mirror. And the reflection didn't match. The curtain hadn't closed. It had only reset. They called it peace, but it didn't last. In the days that followed Hollow Creek's awakening, people tried to stitch their lives back together like survivors after a war they couldn't name. Grocery stores reopened with half-filled shelves. A few teachers showed up at the school, unsure whether the students would arrive. And when they did, they stared blankly, waiting for lessons no one knew how to teach. Church bells rang out of instinct, not faith. The whole town felt like a broken record trying to play something new using the old, scratched grooves. But something else had returned, too. Something none of them wanted to admit. The timing had started subtly. Lights flickering at exactly the same time each night, a dog barking in 3-beat intervals. Even people's footsteps began sensing, 1-2, 1-2, like a background rhythm forming beneath the surface of daily life. It was unconscious, but undeniable. Lena noticed it first. Rachel still hadn't spoken a word, but she had started tapping her fingers in perfect tempo on the kitchen table every morning. No variation. A 4.4 beat. A cadence drilled so deeply into her it seemed instinctual, like a heartbeat that had been rewired. Like she was still in rehearsal. And then there was the sound. A soft static buzz in the background of everything. At first, Lena thought it was in her ears, a lingering symptom of trauma. But then Marian heard it too. Then the librarian. Then a postman who swore he'd started hearing it only after he looked too long at his bathroom mirror. No one had repaired the broken mirrors in their homes. And maybe that was the only reason the town hadn't been rewritten yet. But the cracks, they were healing. On their own. Marian kept the journal close. The one she found in the basement. The one she supposedly wrote. She didn't trust it. Not because of what it said, but because of how familiar it felt. Every sentence carried her tone. Her shorthand. Her phrases. It was her handwriting. But the Marian who existed now didn't remember ever writing it. And worse, it kept growing. Every morning, she'd find a few new lines at the bottom of the last page. Not full entries, just directions. Ms. Green returns to classroom, finds the mirror gone, speaks to Lena, decides to burn the stage, fails. They weren't predictions, they were instructions. And every time she disobeyed, the world seemed to stutter, like reality hesitated, unsure whether to improvise or reset. She tested it once. She was supposed to return to the school at 9:00 a.m., according to the journal. Instead, she stayed in bed, and for 5 hours, the sun didn't move. Lena started drawing again, not art, maps, of places she didn't recognize but had seen in her dreams, cities built in circles, towns with no mirrors, but thousands of eyes built into walls. She couldn't explain why she drew them. only that she felt compelled, like something inside her needed to prepare, and in one of those sketches, she saw it again. The theater, but not theirs, a different one, older, bigger, built underground, beneath a desert, and in every seat a mask, not a person, just masks watching, waiting, all facing a blank stage, all empty, all ready. Rachel finally spoke. It was just one word, whispered into Lena's ear while they were cooking in silence. Cute. And when Lena turned to look at her, Rachel's eyes had changed. Not visibly, just distant. Like she was watching something from behind a thick pane of glass. She didn't say anything else that day. Or the next. One by one, the town began to fall in line again. People who had been freed slowly slipped back into old patterns. Ava Donovan, who had vanished for days, returned to work at the bakery and began serving identical orders, smiling the same smile she swore she'd buried. Principal Hendricks, who had torn apart his office in a panic when the awakening began, was suddenly found calmly arranging his schedule again. Meticulously, down to the minute. Marian watched them with growing horror, and then one morning her reflection smiled before she did. Just a fraction of a second earlier. But it was enough. The auditorium had been condemned. Or, so they believed. But when Marian walked past it on her late night patrol, she saw lights under the door. Not flickering, not broken. Steady, bright, rehearsal lights. She stood there for a long time staring at the door, listening. The static buzzes was louder now. And underneath it clapping. She called Lena. They met at midnight. Crowbars in hand. They broke through the boarded-up entrance and stepped inside. The theater was pristine, clean, as if nothing had ever burned. The seats were full, but not with people, with mannequins, dozens of them, each one wearing a mask made of plaster and mirror shards, each one facing the stage, and on that stage, a single chair, facing the crowd, and a script, sitting on the seat. The front page read, "Welcome back, Ms. Green. You've been missed." Lena backed out of the room slowly, her hands trembling. Marian stepped forward. She picked up the script. The pages flipped on their own. The final page contained only one line, "Final blackout." Curtain falls. One must stay. She tore the page out, set it on fire, but the words didn't burn. They glowed, brighter, etched themselves onto the stage floor as smoke poured upward. The mannequins turned their heads in unison. Every mirror on their faces cracked. And then the lights went out. Outside, the town woke up again. Same as always, only one person missing. Marian Green. No one remembered seeing her go. No one asked where she'd gone. Her name disappeared from her mailbox. Her classroom was reassigned. Her photo faded from the yearbook. Only Lena and Rachel remembered. And every night, Lena dreamed of that chair on the stage, empty now, waiting. But somewhere else, she knew the director was back in his seat, holding the next script. And now Rachel's name was on the first page. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place with a child in it. Lena sat at the kitchen table, Rachel across from her, both of them nursing untouched mugs of lukewarm tea. Outside, Hollow Creek wore its usual mask, sunlight shining at perfect angles, trees swaying like they'd been choreographed, neighbors waving with fixed grins and empty stares. It was a peaceful painting, if you didn't know what had been scraped away to make room for it. But inside this kitchen, something was wrong. Something subtle. Rachel hadn't blinked in 2 minutes. Lena didn't say a word. She just watched, carefully, silently counting the seconds. 2 minutes, 45 seconds. Still no blink. Then, finally, Rachel turned her head and smiled. Not like a child. Not like someone who had been saved. It was the smile of someone reading from a teleprompter. A beat too perfect. A moment too smooth. "Can we go outside today?" Rachel asked softly, eyes unblinking. Lena's stomach turned. She forced a smile back. "Sure, sweetheart." But inside, every alarm bell in her mind was screaming. The day before, Marian disappeared. Again. This time there was no broken mirror, no final scream, no cryptic broadcast, just silence. Lena had waited at their meeting spot outside the auditorium for hours. But no one came. When she went home, Rachel was already there, humming something that sounded a lot like the theater's static buzz, but slower, softer. Like a lullaby you couldn't shake once it wormed its way into your dreams. She'd asked Rachel where she'd been. Rachel had replied, in rehearsal, and then went back to drawing. Drawing curtains, stages, rows of seats, a figure with no face standing behind a podium, and always, a single word scribbled at the top corner of each page, Xu. Lena tried not to panic. She'd survived the masks. She'd torn through mirrors. She'd fought the director to his knees. But this was different. This was subtle. The kind of evil that didn't shout or scream. It whispered. It waited, and now it was waiting inside the girl she'd fought to rescue. She started noticing changes around town again. Too many coincidences. People turning corners at the same moment every day. Cars stopping at intersections where there were no stop signs. A man standing outside the post office at 4:00 p.m. sharp, every day, holding an envelope but never mailing it. And worse, they all began greeting Lena the same way. With the same words, same intonation, same timing. "We're glad you're here, Detective Harmon." They weren't glad. They weren't here. They were back in rehearsal. Lena needed answers, and she needed them fast. So she went to the one place she'd sworn never to return. The auditorium. Or what remained of it. The police had sealed it off after Marion's disappearance, but Lena knew better. That yellow tape didn't protect anything. It was a prop. A cheap illusion to trick the few remaining minds that still thought free will existed here. She slipped through the side door, flashlight in hand, and immediately felt the shift in air pressure. The electric wrongness that no building should have, like stepping into a vacuum with your lungs full of dread. The chairs had returned, so had the script on stage. Different cover this time. Black leather, no title, inside, blank pages, every one, until the very last. In the center of the final page, written in tiny, perfect red print, "Rachel will replace her." Lena backed away, nearly tripping down the stairs as the stage lights snapped on with a roar. A projector kicked on somewhere behind her. Grainy footage rolled across the backdrop curtain. It was her house, her kitchen. That morning, her, sitting with Rachel. Only this time she wasn't blinking either. The projector cut out, and the sound of slow, deliberate clapping filled the room. Not from the seats, from behind her. She turned around, no one there, just another mirror, this one pristine. And in it, Rachel's reflection smiled, with eyes pitch black, mouth stitched, and hands that weren't hands at all. They were made of paper, script pages. She ran, didn't stop until she burst through her front door, breath ragged, throat raw. Rachel sat at the table, still coloring, still smiling. "Did you find the new script?" she asked, voice far too calm for a 9-year-old. Lena nodded slowly. "What happens next?" Rachel asked, head tilted. "I don't know," Lena said. Rachel's smile faltered for the first time. "I thought you were the lead." Lena crouched down beside her, heart thudding. "Maybe that's the problem," she whispered. "Maybe we were never meant to play the lead." Rachel blinked. Twice. Slowly. Her smile returned. This time uncertain. Then who was? Lena stood, walked to the hallway mirror, saw her reflection looking back. Then realized it wasn't mirroring her movements anymore. That night she found a box on her doorstep. No label. Just a single white envelope on top. Inside the envelope, a photograph. Her and Rachel sitting at the table. Only now there was a third figure standing behind them. A silhouette with a blurred face. Hands on both their shoulders. Written on the back of the photo, blocking note, "She stands behind the lead during Act Third, sir." The box contained 7 new scripts. Identical. Untouched. Ready to be distributed. Lena closed the box, trembling, because she wasn't just part of a performance anymore. She'd been promoted. Not to star. To director. And now, Hollow Creek waited for her next cue. There was a kind of silence that made your ears ring, not because it was loud, but because it was too quiet. Lena sat on the edge of her bed that morning, the unopened scripts fanned out across the comforter, each one gleaming with a faint shimmer under the rising sun. They smelled faintly of old paper and fresh ash. Rachel was still asleep in the next room, breathing steadily, clutching her stuffed rabbit. It was the most human thing Lena had seen her do in days. But even that moment of normalcy felt staged. She picked up one of the scripts. The cover was blank. No title, no name, no production date. Just a black leather book, soft at the edges, too smooth for something that looked handmade. She flipped to the first page. Still blank. Then the second, the third, and then, on page 4, words began appearing, one by one, as if written by an invisible hand. A CTI Lunan Harmo stands alone. She must decide. Write or burn. Burning it would have made sense. She'd done it before. Watched the pages curl and shriek in flame like they were alive. But this one didn't feel like paper. And she couldn't shake the feeling that if she torched it, it might not scream. It might laugh. She tried to tear it instead. The page resisted at first, then bled. A slow ooze of ink trickled down the edge and dripped onto her jeans like it had a pulse. She threw the book across the room. It didn't make a sound when it landed, just stopped existing, mid-air. Gone, not dropped, not fallen, erased. Her bedroom clock reset to midnight. Rachel stirred in the next room, and Lena knew the question wasn't if she'd direct. It was how soon she'd break. At the Hollow Creek Public Library, the windows had been boarded for weeks, ever since someone painted Neno More's Sinus across the front doors in black tar. Still, Lena found the back entrance unlocked. She stepped inside and was hit with the sour smell of mold, dust, and something much older, like time rotting from the inside out. The aisles were silent, books untouched, and yet, on every shelf end cap, a mirror had been mounted. Small ones, compact. They hadn't been there before. She walked past the philosophy section. All the books had been replaced, identical copies, each titled CUES4THE Lost, and under every title written by you. The librarian, an old man named Carl who'd been missing for months, stood behind the main desk. Pale, still. His glasses had fogged, but he didn't blink, didn't wipe them. "You're late," he rasped. "I didn't know I was supposed to be here," Lena replied. "Doesn't matter. This is the scene now." He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside, photographs. Not hers, not Rachel's. Faces she'd never seen before. Kids, teenagers, adults, all marked with stage directions in red pen. Falls during Act TI. Runs in fear but never leaves the town. Forgets name by scene 4. "Who are they?" Lena asked. Carl tilted his head like a broken animatronic. The next cast. That night, she dreamed again. The theater, of course. Only this time, the curtain never rose. She was behind it. And she wasn't alone. Someone stood next to her, breathing loud and ragged. When she turned to look, there was no face. Just a polished, smooth surface where one should have been. A mirror. It tilted slightly, and in it she saw herself, but different, older, colder. Wearing the black leather script like armor, directing actors who wept when they got their lines wrong. And in her reflection's hands, Rachel, mouth sewn shut, eyes blank, still waiting, still obedient. Lena woke up screaming. Rachel sat at the foot of her bed, head cocked to one side. "You look sad," she said. Lena nodded. It was just a dream. Rachel blinked once, then whispered, "Dreams are where they teach us." She turned and walked out of the room. No footsteps. No weight to her movement, like she wasn't fully here anymore. Like she was becoming something else. Lena drove to the edge of town the next morning. Not to escape. She already knew that wasn't possible. She needed to test something. She pulled over by the old highway that led out of Hollow Creek. The signs were still there. Exit 9B Oak Ridge, 14 miles. But the road past the tree line was wrong. Too still. Too clean. No tire marks, no gravel sounds. She stepped forward. 1 foot beyond the line. Suddenly, her ears filled with static, her vision blurred. She tried to take another step, and found herself back in her kitchen, sitting, staring at a mug of cold tea, Rachel at the table, smiling. "You went off script," she said. "Don't," Lena replied. Rachel's smile faded. Then, softly, "You're not the only director anymore." Marion's voice came back that night, over the intercom in the old schoolhouse, crackled and warped, but unmistakable. "Lena, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out." Lena froze. The voice was live. "Not a recording. I'm still in here. Somewhere. Writing, I think. They've made me rewrite you. Rewrite everyone. Every night I forget more of who I am. But I remember one thing," Static swallowed the line. "Then, they don't care about truth. They only care about the scene." Lena whispered, "Where are you?" But the intercom just fizzled, then clicked off, and all the hallway lights turned red. That evening, Rachel drew a new picture. Lena watched over her shoulder. It was a theater, again. But this time, the audience was filled with children, hundreds of them, all smiling, all wearing masks, and on stage, a single chair, empty, with the name Lena Harmon carved into it. There was only one conclusion left. One line the script hadn't written yet. She wasn't supposed to be the director. She was supposed to fail, to break, to hand over the stage, so they could bring in someone else. Someone younger, someone obedient, someone like Rachel. The next morning, the mailbox held a new envelope. Inside, "Opening night is in 3 days. No sender, no location. Just a time, 7:00 p.m., curtain up." And on the back of the envelope, "No understudies this time. Everyone plays their part." Lena stood in front of the mirror that night, knife in one hand, the script in the other. And for the first time, the reflection didn't match her movements. It only stared, and smiled, and whispered, "Break a leg." The envelope had no return address, but Hollow Creek didn't need one anymore. The entire town was the sender. It had been writing its letters for weeks, whispering its invitations through radios, with no signal and chalk markings that only showed up in the rain. Lena didn't remember walking back into the house after finding the envelope. She didn't remember how her shoes ended up perfectly lined by the front door, or how her kitchen clock reset itself to 7:00. Time had stopped pretending here. The countdown had begun. The script sat untouched on the kitchen table, still sealed. A thick black ribbon wrapped it like a gift, knotted at the center like it wanted to be pulled. Every part of Lena told her not to touch it. But another part, deeper, quieter, the part that had been rewired by weeks of trauma, was already reaching for it. The ribbon came undone easily, curling like it was relieved. The cover read, "Only final draft." Rachel hadn't come downstairs all morning. Lena hadn't heard her speak since the intercom transmission. Not a word, not even footsteps. The girl who once hummed Mirror, static like a lullaby, had gone silent, and that silence weighed heavier than any scream. Lena called her name. Once. Twice. No answer. Upstairs, the door to Rachel's room was closed, though Lena didn't remember closing it. She reached for the knob, cold to the touch, and slowly opened it. Inside, the bed was perfectly made. The window was open. And taped to the mirror above the dresser was a single note, "She's with them now." But she left the seat warm. Lena stared at it for a long time, refusing to blink. There was no one else in the room, but she could feel breathing from behind the mirror. By dusk, the town had shifted again. Buildings seemed sharper, edges too defined, like someone had re-sketched them in ink. Colors were overly saturated, reds too red, shadows too deep. The people of Hollow Creek moved with rehearsed precision again. Lena passed them on her way to the auditorium, and every one of them offered a polite nod, identical smiles, and the same phrase, "See you at 7." Somehow, they all knew. No invitations had been delivered, no flyers handed out, but they knew. Because this wasn't just a performance. It was the final act. The auditorium was alive now. Not metaphorically. Breathing. Pulsing. Each step Lena took across the threshold made the floor throb beneath her feet, like she was stepping into a throat, not a theater. The lobby was filled, not with people but with their masks. Hundreds of them, hanging from the ceiling like ornaments, each one labeled with a name she recognized. Some gone, some still walking the streets. She found her own, hanging dead center. No eyes, just a mouth, open wide like it was still screaming. Beneath it another note. You may direct, but the house always wins. She entered the main hall at 6:59. The audience was seated. No one spoke. Not a single whisper, cough, or rustle. Just rows and rows of townspeople sitting with their hands folded neatly in their laps, all facing the stage. They blinked in unison. They breathed in time. And Lena saw something else. They weren't alone. Behind every person sat a double. Shadowy, distorted versions of themselves. Some wore masks. Some didn't. Some looked alive. Others were rotting, skin draped over bones like wet newspaper. But every shadow had a hand on their counterpart's shoulder. The audience wasn't watching. It was waiting to take their place. The stage was bare except for one chair, center spot, lit from above. On the chair sat Rachel, back straight, hands folded, face blank, eyes completely white. She didn't blink, didn't look at Lena, just stared ahead. The director wasn't in his seat. There was no one in the balcony, no mirror behind the curtain, only that pulsing silence. Then, exactly at 7:00 p.m., the overhead lights snapped off. A single spotlight cut through the dark and landed on Lena. The stage creaked beneath her. The script in her hand burned cold, and a voice, deep, detached, almost tired, filled the air, not through speakers, not in her head, through everything. The walls, the floor, the blood in her teeth. You wrote the final act. Now read it. She opened the script. Her hands moved on their own. The first page was blank, the second a single line. Lena walks to center stage and confesses everything. She didn't move. Not yet. Her mouth was dry, her legs heavy. But the audience didn't care. They waited. The shadows behind them leaned forward slightly ready, and Rachel began to smile. Lena took a step, then another. She reached center stage and stared down at the script again. It had flipped on its own. She tells them what she did, what she didn't stop. She tells them who she replaced. She looked at Rachel. Do you remember me? Lena asked, voice barely audible. Rachel didn't reply, not with words, but she nodded, once, slow, and her smile grew wider. Lena looked back at the audience. They didn't blink, didn't move, but she saw something in their eyes, recognition. They weren't just here to watch. They remembered the fire, the disappearances, the rehearsals, the masks they had always known. But they played along, because that's what the script demanded. And now they wanted someone to blame. She stepped closer to Rachel, touched her shoulder. I didn't replace you, she whispered. I tried to save you. The script in her other hand turned another page. She lies. The director watches. The final cue is given. Lena felt her lips tremble. I'm not going to say it, she said aloud, dropping the script to the floor. The room gasped. Not the audience. The building, the very air recoiled. The chair trembled beneath Rachel, and the shadows behind the crowd stood up. Lena backed away, heart hammering, eyes darting toward the exits. They were gone. No doors, no windows. Only walls that curved inward now, the whole theater folding into itself like a womb. The stage cracked under her feet. The lights exploded, one by one, and the voice returned. Every scene ends. This one ends with you. Lena grabbed Rachel, shook her. Wake up. Rachel, you have to wake up. For a moment, nothing, then a flicker. The whiteness in Rachel's eyes shimmered, cracked, and beneath the pale glaze, Lena saw it a tear. One, rolling down her cheek. Rachel whispered, I don't want to be the lead. Lena pulled her in, held her, tight, and whispered, then we walk off stage. They ran, not toward any door, there weren't any, but through the crowd, through the audience that now howled, their masks falling off, revealing faces made of paper and words and broken dreams. The shadows screamed, but couldn't follow, because they weren't meant to move. They were never cast, only reflected. The moment they reached the back of the auditorium, everything stopped. Not a slow fade, not a blackout. Just gone. No building.
No chairs.
Oh, no crowd, no stage. Only woods, real trees, real dirt underfoot, and the sound of wind that didn't hum in 4x4 time. Lena turned to Rachel. Do you think it's over? Rachel looked up at the sky and whispered, not yet. Then she opened her palm. Inside it, a ticket stub, black, with gold lettering. Next performance begins soon. Please take your seat. And behind them, the sound of clapping. Slow, deliberate, getting louder. The applause chased them into the forest. Not like the thunderous ovations of packed theaters, but slower, purposeful. One clap every few seconds, like a clock marking its last minutes before midnight. Lena and Rachel ran until their lungs burned, feet snapping twigs and crushing leaves that smelled like real earth, not stage props. But even as they pushed deeper into the trees, the sound followed, steady, close, and worse, familiar, because the clapping didn't echo. It multiplied. At first it was one set of hands, then two, then four, then eight. Like each step they took summoned another version of it. Shadows didn't trail behind them anymore, they clapped ahead, guiding them, hurting them, mocking every detour with applause, like an invisible audience waiting for them to give in and take their places again. Rachel stumbled over a root and hit the ground hard. Lena dropped beside her, grabbing her shoulders, trying to hush the panicked breathing and trembling limbs. But Rachel wasn't crying. She was laughing. A sharp, brittle sound like glass breaking. Do you hear them? She whispered. They're practicing again. Lena didn't ask who they were. She already knew. They found shelter beneath a decaying cabin at the edge of the woods. Something that predated Hollow Creek's stagecraft, maybe. Something forgotten by the script. The door creaked open with resistance, hinges stiff with time, not effect. Real decay, a gift. Inside, it was dust and cobwebs and cold. And finally, silence. Lena blocked the door with a broken bookshelf. Rachel curled up on a moth-eaten cot in the corner, eyes open, staring at nothing. Her hands moved in her lap, tracing shapes, letters, maybe, with invisible ink. Lena struck a match and found an old oil lantern, surprised when it sputtered to life. She crouched in the flickering light and pulled out the black ticket stub Rachel had clutched since they left the auditorium. It had changed. The gold lettering was gone. Now, etched in deep crimson, Final par for our eminency et duo seats. No, beneath it, in smaller print, applause is mandatory. She felt sick. Rachel spoke again just before dawn. Her voice had changed, lower, slower, like someone else was warming it up. There's no real world left, she murmured. He rewrote the sky first, then the birds, then the dogs. Now it's the people. Lena didn't interrupt. She couldn't. Rachel sat up slowly, staring at the ceiling. You know how he does it, right? He doesn't pull the strings. He replaces them, line by line, day by day, until even you start asking where your lines are. She looked over, eyes wide. Have you checked the back of your neck? Lena rushed into the bathroom, more instinct than logic. A broken mirror above the sink gave only fragments of her reflection, but enough. She turned, lifted her hair. At the base of her neck, something. A faint, raised mark, like stitching. Old, healed over, but unmistakable, not a scar from injury. A seam. She felt it now, the tug, the itch she'd ignored for weeks. And when she pressed it, her vision flickered. For just a second, the cabin was gone. She stood in a soundstage, studio lights overhead, Rachel sitting in a makeup chair. A man behind her, adjusting her face with long, skeletal fingers, smiling with too many teeth and no eyes. Then darkness again. Back in the cabin. Rachel, shaking in the cot. Lena dropped to her knees. We're still inside it, she whispered. By midday, the sky outside turned violet. Clouds froze mid-drift, stuck like a paused video frame. The air began to smell like burnt film, and somewhere in the distance, music started playing. A slow overture. Soft strings, building. A prelude. The kind that comes before the curtain rises. Lena and Rachel stepped out of the cabin together. There was no road, no path, but their feet knew where to go. The forest around them felt narrower now, as if the trees leaned in to watch, to listen, to record. They moved through a corridor of bark and whispering leaves until they reached the clearing. The auditorium stood there again. Not rebuilt, reborn, bigger, wider, glass and gold and velvet drapes that moved without wind. And outside, a sign flickered in old neon open NGHT, House of Fellow. ENRANCE Mendatury. There were no guards, no locks, just an open door. And from inside, that slow, deliberate clapping. Rachel took Lena's hand. Her skin felt colder than it should have. Do we have to go in? Lena asked. Rachel didn't answer, just stepped forward. So Lena followed. Inside, the seats were indeed full. Every person from Hollow Creek sat in perfect silence. And in every seat behind them, those shadows again. Only this time, they didn't just sit still. They breathed, synchronously, like lungs that had waited too long to inhale, like the room itself would collapse if they stopped. On the stage stood 2 chairs, one white, one black, and a table between them. On the table, a bell, a script, 2 glasses of water. Lena walked toward them. She felt the eyes of the crowd, not watching, not judging, just waiting. Rachel climbed onto the white chair and sat. No prompting. Lena took the black one, and as soon as she did, the lights dimmed. A voice filled the space again. No longer deep or theatrical, just calm, plain, like a doctor delivering bad news. This is the final note in a dying score. The ending is optional. The applause is not. Then silence. The script in front of them opened on its own. 1 page, 1 line. Written across the center, choose reset or remember. Lena looked at Rachel. Do you know what that means? Rachel looked back. Her eyes were normal again, full of fear, but steady. If we reset, she whispered, everyone forgets, we go back, play the scenes. Smile, eat, sleep, pretend, forever. Lena swallowed hard, and if we remember, Rachel turned toward the crowd. They die, the real ones, the ones still inside. All the people who weren't replaced yet. We burn the script. The stage falls. The shadows go with it. Lena blinked. So we choose who stays. Rachel nodded, and who gets to leave. The bell waited between them. The script glowed softly, and the audience smiled, ready for the final scene. Lena reached toward the bell and stopped. She looked at the crowd, at the faces she knew, at the ones behind them, too, at the copies, the doubles, the understudies, and she realized they'd all been her once. Every person in every seat had taken a turn wearing the mask, holding the script, directing the scene, applauding the lie. And this wasn't a choice between right or wrong. It was a choice between ending the show or letting it rewrite her one last time. She looked at Rachel, then reached into her coat, pulled out the ticket stub, still black, but now burning at the edges. Turning to ash in her hand, she whispered, I choose it, and the lights went out, curtain down. No applause, just the breath of a crowd too stunned to clap, and the slow terror of a script being ripped apart from the inside. There was no curtain call, no triumphant swell of music, no satisfied hush as the audience leaned back in catharsis. Just darkness, thick, swallowing, and final. The kind of dark that doesn't just obscure, it listens. Lena sat frozen in it, her hand still outstretched from tearing the page, heart pounding against her ribs like it was begging to be let out. The air around her changed. It didn't cool or warm, it simply tightened, like the room was drawing breath, preparing for a scream it hadn't decided whether to release or swallow. Then, slowly, too slowly, the house lights flickered, not on, not fully. They twitched, like faulty nerves in a dying body. Lena blinked against the strobe of semi-light, but the seats in front of her weren't full anymore. The crowd was gone, every seat empty. Every mask that once watched her now lay face down on the theater floor, blank eyes turned to wood. But the shadows remained. Now they stood in the aisles, silent, unmasked, and worse, closer. Rachel wasn't in her chair. Lena turned, found it empty, still warm, but the child was gone, and in her place, on the seat, sat the script, torn down the middle, bleeding ink across the upholstery. The words on the ripped page still pulsed faintly like dying coals. You chose wrong. Then the ink began to unwrite itself, one letter at a time, scrubbing the last trace of choice from the page. A low static sound began to crawl through the air, not from the speakers, from the stage itself. Lena stepped down, every creak beneath her feet echoing like it came from inside her own skull. The spotlight above her didn't follow. It remained fixed on the now empty chairs, as if they were the stars now, as if the audience was still watching them somehow. Then came the sound. Not a voice, not a word, just clapping, slow, one person, far off, echoing from the rafters, then another, until the whole house, empty or not, was filled with the sound of hands that weren't really hands, congratulating a scene that had never ended. Lena covered her ears. It didn't help. The clapping wasn't in her ears, it was in her bones. She staggered backstage, past mirrors that no longer reflected anything, just blank voids where her face should have been. She searched frantically for Rachel, calling her name again and again. But every time she spoke, her voice came back to her distorted, like the theater was repeating her through its own mouth. And then she saw it, the trapdoor. Center stage, slightly ajar, breathing. She dropped to her knees and yanked it open. Darkness below, but not empty. Stairs, wooden and splintered, led down into a space that didn't exist on any blueprint. Not a basement, not a storage room. Something older. Lena descended, step by step, and with each step, the clapping grew quieter. Not because it was fading, because she was leaving it behind. At the bottom, a corridor, narrow, walls dripping with something that looked like paint but smelled like decay. At the end of the hall, a door. Metal, bolted from the outside. She didn't hesitate. She threw it open. Inside, light, not bright, not warm, but steady. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling of a small, windowless room. And in the center, sitting on the floor, was Rachel, her knees tucked to her chest, eyes blank, mouth moving, but no sound. Lena rushed to her, held her, whispered apologies she no longer understood, and slowly the child looked up and spoke, but not in her voice. "I told you couldn't change the scene," Rachel said, her tone hollow. "The audience doesn't want change. They want closure. Even if it's fake." Lena pulled back. "Who are you?" Rachel smiled, not the lead. She held up her hand. Inside it, a new script, thin, maybe 10 pages. On the cover, post-credit scene. Rachel pressed it to Lena's chest. "You have to finish it," she whispered. "Why?" "Because the house lights never rise unless the last line is read." Lena took it. Her hands shook. She opened to the first page. INT. Fargo Tana Rome. In IGHT, the detective realizes she is not the writer. She is the final line. The lights above began to dim again. Rachel stood up. She was taller now. Older, eyes full of something that wasn't a child's pain anymore. Something closer to mercy. "I'm sorry," she said. Lena looked up. "For what?" "For making you remember." And then she vanished, not like a trick. Not in a puff of smoke. Just unwritten. Gone in a blink. No scream. No farewell. Only the sound of pages turning. And Lena, alone again, stood in the empty room, the thin script clutched to her chest. Outside, the clapping had stopped. The audience had left. Or maybe they were never there. Maybe they'd been her all along. Watching herself, she found her way back up through the trapdoor. The theater was cold now, lifeless. The stage lights dim, the chairs empty. Even the shadows had moved on, but the curtain still hung, waiting, breathing, begging. Lena stepped up, stood center stage, and opened to the final page. One sentence, she says her last line, and exits. Lena looked up, looked into the emptiness, and spoke. "I was never meant to be the lead." And the curtain dropped. It fell like a guillotine. The velvet curtain sliced the space between Lena and whatever world had been watching. It landed with a sound not of fabric but finality, a thud that rippled through the theater like the last heartbeat of something long kept alive by sheer force of will. Then silence, Not the expectant hush of a crowd, but the cold vacuum that follows after the story's done. No encore, no applause. Just darkness thick enough to smother thought. Lena stood behind the curtain, her knees trembling. Her lips still tingled from the words she had spoken. Her last line. It hadn't felt like acting. It felt like confession. But no one had come to relieve her of the moment. No stagehands. No stage manager. No one to pull her away and tell her she did well. Just the heavy dark pressing closer, like the theater wanted one final taste of her. She dropped the script. It didn't hit the floor. It simply vanished, mid-fall, like every other lie that had been written in this place. She turned, and behind the stage, the world had changed. The auditorium didn't exist anymore. There were no seats, no balconies, no exit signs glowing weakly in red, just hallway after hallway of draped curtains, mirrors, and doorways that led into other scenes. Unfinished ones. She recognized some. A mock-up of her childhood bedroom, a hospital room, an interrogation chamber drenched in flickering light, a diner that smelled like spoiled coffee and rain. Every one of them was a memory she hadn't written, but had been written into. She passed through them slowly, her hands trailing against fabric and walls that pulsed faintly under her touch. The very space groaned with the weight of old lines, discarded monologues, and scenes that were rehearsed but never performed. This wasn't a backstage. This was a graveyard of stories. In the farthest corridor, she found a single door, unmarked. Wood, old and cracked, with paint peeling in long, curling flakes like skin from a sunburn. She reached for the knob. It turned easily inside a room, plain, empty, except for one chair facing a wall of mirrors. In the chair sat a man. No movement, no sound. He looked like he'd been waiting there a long, long time. Lena stepped inside. The door closed behind her on its own. The man didn't turn around. He wore a suit, tailored, black, dusty. The collar slightly crooked, like it had been pulled on in a hurry a lifetime ago. His reflection filled the wall in front of him. Countless copies of himself, each one flickering ever so slightly, like poorly synced video feeds. She recognized him, not from memory, but from presence. The director, the one who'd never taken a bow, the one whose name was never in the program. "Why me?" she asked. Her voice sounded distant, fragile. The man didn't move, but his reflections spoke, every one of them, in perfect sync. "Because you believed the audience was real." She stepped closer. "I didn't want this," she said. "I wanted the truth." One of the reflections blinked. "That was the truth." "No," Lena said, her voice shaking now. "It was scripted. All of it, even the pain." "Especially the pain," the reflections answered. "That's what made them stay in their seats." Lena clenched her fists. "I tore up the final draft. I ended the show." The man finally turned. His eyes were black, not with darkness but absence. Like whatever had been inside him had long since moved out. "You ended a show," he said. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out another script. Held it out to her. This one was thinner than the others. Handwritten, stained at the corners. The title read, "The Sequel." Lena stared at it, didn't take it. "Why me again?" "Because the audience doesn't want a new protagonist," he said, almost gently. "They want the same one, making different mistakes." She shook her head. "No, I'm done." His face twitched, not anger, something worse, disappointment. Then he opened the script himself. "Read aloud int. Room of moar hours, lana te kies teach e scare pt." And he looked up, waiting. Lena turned toward the wall of mirrors. They showed different versions of her. Lena screaming. Lena running. Lena burning pages. Lena standing before an audience that clapped as she bled. Each one paused at a different frame. Each one trapped. She took a step back. "I won't take it," she said. She waited for the world to shift, for the trapdoor to open, for the curtains to swallow her whole again. But nothing happened, because something new was happening. She had refused her line, and the director couldn't move on without her. He stood. Pages fell from his coat like feathers, scattered across the floor. Thousands of them, Scenes from every life she could have lived, but each one ended the same. She dies. They clap, it begins again. The mirrors cracked, one by one. The room trembled. He stepped toward her. "You have to take it," he said. "No," she whispered. The ceiling moaned. Dust rained down. The air stank of smoke and old grief. He held out the script again. "You are the story," he hissed. And Lena looked at him. Really looked. At the stitched seams around his eyes. The ink pooled in the folds of his neck. The way his hands shook from holding too many endings. And she realized he wasn't the writer. He was just the first reader. So she did the only thing she could. She took one of the fallen pages at her feet, blank, held it up, and wrote, with her fingertip, with her blood, maybe. It didn't matter. She scratched out a single line. She closes the book. She walks out. The walls began to scream. The director lunged. The mirrors shattered. But Lena turned toward the door, which no longer existed. There was only open space now, an unlit stage, a world waiting to be real again. And as the ceiling cracked and the ink rained down from the rafters like black snow, she walked through it. No script, no cue, just a choice. And for once, no one clapped. Lena walked into the dark, and the world did not greet her with fanfare. No grand reveal, no lights lifting to show her a new set or new cast, just silence. An absence that was both hollow and full, like walking into a room where someone had just screamed, but left no trace behind. Her shoes scraped across something cold. Concrete, maybe. Real, unpolished. She kept walking. Behind her, there was no door, no stage, no director, no Rachel. Only memory. And memory, she was learning, was the most dangerous stage of all. She wandered for what felt like hours, maybe days. There was no sun, no sky, just the hint of space stretching above her like a ceiling too high to touch. Her footsteps echoed softly. She wasn't alone. Not truly. The air hummed with something, with breath maybe, or waiting, and then she heard it, a voice, low, shaky, not distant, not near, just around her. "I was here before you." Lena stopped, turned, nothing. The voice again. "They pulled me out of a hospital bed. Said I had the right kind of scars. Said I had the look. I never even made it to the first rehearsal." She saw something then. A shape shifting in the dark, not a man, not yet. Just fragments, a mouth with no face, a spine unraveling like film. Fingers curled around a pen that didn't move. "They called me lead one." Lena stepped back. The shape took a step forward. "They wrote me dying scenes. Dozens. Said the crowd loved a tragic arc." Another step. "I tried to rewrite them. Said I wanted a role where I lived." The voice dropped, hollow now. They laughed. He emerged into the faint light that Lena hadn't even realized was glowing. Just a dim silver hovering in the space between them. He looked worn, but not old. Ageless in the way trauma sculpts the face. His eyes weren't entirely human, too reflective, as if someone had left mirrors inside them and never cleaned the glass. "I know you," Lena whispered. He nodded. "We've all known each other. We just forget between drafts." Lena swallowed hard. "What is this place?" He looked around. "Where actors rot. The roles they didn't finish end up here. You're a version of me." He shook his head. "I'm a version of what you almost were." And then he turned and pointed behind her. She looked back and gasped. Dozens of paths had opened up. Not roads, scenes. Hallways lined with curtains, doors labeled in fading chalk pilot. Reboot, mid-season finale, cold open. Inside each, flickering glimpses of versions of herself. One Lena covered in blood, laughing in a kitchen. One Lena alone in a jail cell, whispering lines to a cracked wall. One Lena staring down an audience with a bomb strapped to her chest. Every version trying to rewrite something that had already been staged. "This is where they put the spares," the man said. "The ones who said no. The ones who broke character too early. The ones who asked questions." Lena turned back to him. "Why did they keep trying?" He smiled, bitter. "Because the audience always forgets, but we don't." She looked down at her hands, still trembling, still hers. "I want out." The man laughed, not cruelly, just tired. There's no out. There's only different drafts. A tremor rolled through the space, not from beneath, from above. The air itself shuddered, and Lena knew that something had found her again. The same something that lived in the rafters, in the rewrites, in the soft applause that came when no one was clapping. He's rewriting, the man said, backing away. You've been off script too long. Lena turned, suddenly sprinting toward one of the paths, the one labeled unaired episode. The chalk smudged beneath her fingers as she shoved open the curtain. Inside a small house, quiet, mid-afternoon light, a woman cooking in the kitchen, blonde, humming. Lena knew her face before she saw it fully. Her mother. Not the real one. Not exactly. But close enough that it hit like a gut punch. The woman turned and smiled, welcome home. Lena froze. Her legs wouldn't move. Because somewhere in her brain, a voice whispered, if you respond to the cue, you accept the scene. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. Her mother tilted her head. Dinner's almost ready. Lena backed out slowly, breath caught in her throat. The curtain closed behind her, sealing the false home. Another tremor rolled through the space, and the overhead dark shimmered like static. He was watching again. Writing again. She ran, from one scene to the next, a hospital room, a courtroom, a burning church, each one beckoning her, each one trying to seduce her into accepting a role. She kept moving, kept refusing, until she found one labeled nothing at all. Just a blank doorway, no script, no stage lights, no prompts, just silence. She stepped through it, found herself in a plain room. White walls, no mirrors, no curtains, no director, only a desk and a chair, and on the desk a typewriter, old, dusty, but ready. Next to it a single page of paper, blank, and on the page, written in faint pencil, only one sentence, you may begin when ready. Lena sat, looked at the typewriter, looked at her own hands, still shaking, still scarred, still hers. She reached out and placed her fingers on the keys. For the first time, there was no cue, no outline, no expectation, just possibility. She closed her eyes and began to write, not for an audience, not for applause, but for freedom. And in the distance, far behind her, the last of the echoes faded, the clapping stopped, and nothing took its place. The keys clicked like heartbeats, slow, unsure, then faster, braver. Lena's fingers trembled as she typed, not because she feared what would come out, but because for the first time it was hers. Not his, not theirs. No director whispering from the rafters, no audience breathing in sync. The sound of creation felt wrong at first. It had never been allowed to sound like this. No reverb, no cues. Just the soft pressure of metal striking paper, word by word, breath by breath. She didn't know what she was writing. That was the point. The story began somewhere unexpected. A girl wakes up in a town that forgets her every day. A boy records everything he sees, afraid one day he'll vanish from his own memories. A theater without a stage. A script without an ending. She wasn't writing about herself, but she wasn't not. The room was still, the light overhead unwavering. No flickers. No thunderous applause. The silence around her didn't press in, it waited, patient. Like real silence should. She kept going. Hours passed, or maybe years. Lena wrote until her fingertips bruised, until the ribbon dried and the letters faded into ghostly imprints, until her back ached and her vision blurred and her mouth went dry from forgetting to speak. Still, she didn't stop, because stopping meant someone else could step in, and she wasn't ready to hand it over. Not again. There were no hallucinations now. No hallucinated cues. No shadowed figures leaning from behind the curtain to coax her back onto a stage she'd sworn to burn. But she felt something shift, as if the air around her noticed the defiance and didn't know what to do with it. Then, without warning, the keys jammed, the page ripped slightly, and the machine let out a soft groan before freezing. Lena exhaled. She sat back, flexing sore fingers. The last sentence she wrote was barely legible. It read, "She never goes back." No punctuation, no flourish, just a line that felt like a lock slamming shut. She stood, legs wobbling. The room remained unchanged, still blank, still quiet. But outside the doorway, she could hear nothing. Not the fake birdsong the scenes used to pipe through speakers. Not the whirring buzzes of rewrites in the walls. Not even the ghostly applause that had always found her no matter how far she ran. The quiet wasn't manufactured anymore. It was earned. She stepped to the doorway and pushed it open. On the other side, sunlight, but not stage light. Not tinted gold through a gel. Real light. Warm and uneven and sharp enough to make her squint. For a second, she thought maybe it was another trick, another trap. But then she felt it on her skin, heat, unfiltered, unscripted. She stepped through, and something in her chest, something she hadn't even realized had been shackled, broke. Not in pain, in release. Like the final thread of someone else's hand yanking her thoughts had snapped. She was free. The world she stepped into was imperfect. The grass uneven, the trees asymmetrical, the sky streaked with thin clouds like scars, and that's how she knew it was real. Nothing about it wanted to be watched. There were no marks on the ground where cameras had been. No microphones disguised as birds. No cue cards held up by invisible hands. She sat on the grass and looked back at the doorway behind her. It was gone. Just vanished. Not in a puff of smoke. Not behind a curtain drop. Just no longer needed. Lena leaned back and stared up at the sky. And for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, she didn't brace for a line to be fed to her. Didn't wait for someone to direct her gaze, adjust her expression, or rewrite her moment of peace. She thought of Rachel, the real one. The one who had slipped away, folded into the false scripts like tissue in flame. She thought of the other versions of herself, burned, buried, rewritten, applauded. She thought of the director, of the mirrors, of the trapdoors. And she didn't cry. She didn't mourn, because those were lines too, expected, performed. Instead, she breathed and smiled, not like a closing scene, but like a beginning. She never did find a new town, not one with people, anyway. But she didn't need one. The theater wasn't chasing her anymore, because without a script, it didn't know how to follow. It was still out there, somewhere, for someone else, waiting for the next desperate soul to walk in looking for answers, for meaning, for an audience. She just hoped they were strong enough to walk away before it was too late. She lived quietly after that. No performances, no roles. She found a stream, caught her own food, learned the rhythm of real life again. Not perfect, not pretty, but hers. And sometimes when the wind shifted, she'd hear faint echoes, laughter, or lines from plays she never remembered acting in. But she never turned around. She never answered. She never walked back, because she was no longer Lena the lead, or Lena the rewrite, or Lena the final scene. She was just Lena, and she had finally closed the book. The wind changed again. A dry gust swept through the trees with a low, guttural whisper, not like a storm, but like a stagehand dragging scenery in the dark. Lena stirred. She was sitting by the stream, barefoot in the dirt, watching minnows dart through the ripples. For weeks, maybe months, this had been her world, untouched, unguided. She hadn't seen a reflection in all that time. No mirrors, no windows, no audience. Just the woods. Just the sound of water and birds and her own heartbeat keeping time. But this wind, this wasn't right. It didn't carry rain or cold. It carried words, faint, like a memory trying to be reborn. She stood, head tilting toward the woods, and there it was again. A voice, thin, almost childlike. Lena, she froze. Not because the name was hers, but because the voice was Rachel's. It wasn't possible. She had buried that name deep, locked it behind the final curtain, sealed under ink and silence. Rachel had been the tether, the bait, the script's soft whisper in her ear, the girl who bled lines like lullabies, who'd become more echo than child. But Lena heard her now, not in her head, not from the past, from somewhere nearby. She grabbed a stick and moved through the woods. Every step forward felt like tearing through layers of herself. Like each branch she broke was part of a set being dismantled around her. The trees thickened, the light dimmed. The air turned strange. Not cold, not warm, just theatrical. As if the forest had never been forest at all. Just another scene, waiting. She found it in a clearing, a stage, not a real one, not like before. Just a platform, wooden, rough, built with no precision. Around it, the trees had bent into a crude amphitheater, and, on the stage, one chair, facing away from her. In it sat a girl, blonde, thin, feet swinging inches off the ground. Lena stepped closer. Rachel, no answer. She circled the stage slowly. Every inch forward dragged something ancient and cold into her lungs. The girl turned as she approached. Slowly, mechanically. It wasn't Rachel. Not really. Her eyes were black buttonholes, her mouth stitched with thread, her limbs too still to be alive. But she smiled, and from behind the smile, the air spoke. Final cue. We've missed you. Lena stumbled back, nearly tripping off the platform. Behind her, the trees shifted. Their branches rose like scaffolding. Fabric pulled between trunks. Light bulbs swung from ropes that hadn't been there a moment ago. The clearing transformed, not violently, casually, like it had just remembered what it was. And Lena, too late, realized the awful truth. She'd never left the theater. Not completely. She just walked into the intermission. The lull, the pause before the reprise. The silence between acts where actors catch their breath, while the audience waits. The stitched girl blinked once, and the voice returned. A chorus this time. Not one voice, many, all versions of her. All the discarded Linus from the mirror room. All the ones who took the script, and the ones who bled trying not to. The stage remembers. Even if you try to forget. Lena looked around, breath catching. No exits, no doors. No rafters to climb this time. She was on the ground level, where endings weren't written, where choices were rehearsed, not recorded. The girl raised one hand, and a script appeared in her lap, thin, white, unwritten. She offered it, no demand, no trap, just invitation. Lena didn't move, her legs locked, because she understood now. This wasn't a threat, it was worse. It was mercy. One last offer, a story that she could write, not with blood, not with memory, but with freedom, a clean slate. But the price, everything she remembered, everyone she'd lost, everyone who had burned so she could break the script. Rachel, the real one, gone forever if she said yes. She stepped forward anyway, took the script. The girl's stitched mouth split open, thread unraveling like a spool. She didn't scream, she sang, soft, beautiful, the melody of an overture long denied. And Lena began to write, but not her story, not anymore. She wrote Rachel's name, again, and again, and again. Each letter sharp as a knife, each stroke burning across the page like a match dragged over skin. She wrote until the paper bled, until her name disappeared beneath it, until nothing was left but Rachel. And then, she set it down, walked away, back into the trees, not because she was free, but because she chose not to forget. Behind her, the stitched girl wept. Black ink ran from her button eyes. The stage cracked in half, the lights died. And in the quiet that followed, just before the scene collapsed, Lena heard it again, a child's voice, this time real, breathless, afraid. Lena! But she didn't turn back. She'd already taken her last cue. And sometimes, the bravest thing an actor can do is walk off stage while the spotlight's still waiting. She didn't flinch when the sky above her blinked out like a dying stage light. It didn't crash or flicker. It simply stopped existing, as if the bulb was removed from some invisible socket overhead. One moment, there was silver bleeding through the trees, and the next, there was nothing. A blank, a void not of night but of erasure, and Lena kept walking, barefoot, cold. A breeze scraped against her skin like the breath of something watching from the wings. But she didn't turn. Not anymore. The forest around her peeled away in layers. Bark vanished from trees. Leaves lost color, then shape. The grass beneath her feet softened. then dissolved, revealing the raw wooden slats of a forgotten floorboard stage. She knew what was happening. This wasn't nature folding back. This was the world being unwritten. It had no more lines for her. She had stepped too far off script, refused too many cues. The scene could no longer contain her, and yet she walked on. Each step forward now was like walking on memory. The sound of her footfalls echoed back, not just from the world but from her past. Rachel laughing in the storm. The director's voice behind the mirror. The scratching of a pen across paper she never agreed to write. All of it came flooding back, not as hauntings, but as confirmation. Proof that what she'd lived had never been hers to begin with. Until now. She came to a single chair in the middle of a blank floor. It wasn't ornate, not the director's, not a throne, just a simple wooden chair, the kind a stage manager might sit in while watching blocking rehearsals. Forgotten, unloved, waiting, she sat, not because she was tired, but because something told her this was the last place she needed to be. And then the air changed. It listened, the kind of silence that didn't demand noise, the kind of quiet that allowed truths to form. And Lena spoke. No script. No pages in hand. Just her. I remember every version she whispered into the dark. I remember being rewritten. Dying. Failing pleasing. But none of it was mine. A spotlight tried to flicker on. She didn't look toward it. Didn't give it the satisfaction. I remember Rachel. Not the version they fed me, but the real one. The one who was stolen to create drama. I remember what you did to her. The light flickered out again, as if ashamed. I remember you, too, she said to the void. You watching, clapping, waiting for the twist, the ending. The catharsis. She paused. Her breath fogged in front of her. But this story doesn't end for your comfort. Somewhere, someone tried to cue music. A soft overture. A piano. Lena raised a hand. No, silence again. Heavy. Obedient. She stood from the chair, but didn't move. She looked out. Not at a crowd, not at a camera, but through everything. Past the illusions. Past the false sets and rewrites. She looked into the place where stories came from. And said, I'm not a character. The ground cracked beneath her. Fissures tearing through the floorboards like lightning through bone. I'm not a performance. The sky split open, soundless. Ink spilled down like rain, trying to blot her out. She didn't run. I am the blank page. The world shuddered, not in fear, in release. Pages fell from the sky, tens of thousands of them, scripts unwritten, drafts undone. They piled around her feet, reaching her knees, her waist, her shoulders, until only her face remained above the tide of stories never told. And then, slowly, the pile began to sink, not from weight, but from memory. The pages weren't being destroyed, they were being forgotten, line by line. Until all that was left was her. Not the version that cried in scene 6. Not the one who burned in scene 11. Not the version who begged, who pleaded, who gave monologues through stitched lips. Just Lena. No last name, no stage directions, no themes, no audience. And then the world blinked. Not out. In. It didn't end, it began. For the first time, the floor beneath her became soil. Not wood. The air carried no scent of dust or makeup, but rain and dirt and life. She looked down. No spotlight tracked her anymore. No fourth wall to betray. Just a path. Uneven. Real. Untouched by plot. Lena walked. Not because there was a story left to tell, but because she wanted to move. And with every step, she forgot a line. Forgot a role. Forgot a cue. Not in pain. Not as loss, but as healing. And at the end of the path, she saw something small and quiet. Not a stage. Not a trapdoor. Just a cabin, windows lit, a kettle inside boiling. The door opened without a creak. No applause. No reveal. Just warmth, and in the corner, a small cot. A journal. Blank. Waiting. She smiled. Not for the ending, but for the permission. And as she picked up the pen, not fed to her. Not placed in her hand, but one she reached for. She finally wrote, "This one is mine." And no one ever dared write over her again.